Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into the fog-drenched past to explore something soft, sticky, and just a little bit stingy, the quiet business of medieval beekeeping. You're not racing into battle or sitting through a medieval feast with questionable hygiene. No, tonight, you're pulling on a heavy cloak, brushing dew from your lashes, and trudging into the dawn to check on your bees. The grass is soaked. Each step makes that gentle sound as your boots press water from the earth. Your lantern swings from a wooden loop at your belt, casting a warm, flickering glow on your path. The meadow ahead is ghostly pale with fog. You can't see the hives yet, but you hear them, soft murmurs rising from straw domes like the purring of content cats. Peaceful, until someone steps on a stick. A chill seeps under your cloak. You pull it tighter and glance at the sky. No sun yet, just that pre-dawn violet, the color of old plums and sleep-heavy dreams. Somewhere behind you, a cow sneezes. You ignore it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling social, drop your location and what time you're tuning in. There's always someone watching at 3 a.m. from a laundry room in Oslo. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The hives finally emerge from the mist like squat little huts. They're woven skeps, big, upside-down baskets of straw. You count them. 1, 2, 3, 7 in total. Last week there were 8, but one collapsed after a goat leaned on it. The goat is fine. The bees were not amused. You kneel beside the largest hive, one knee sinking into the wet earth. The air smells of crushed thyme and damp wool. The bees aren't angry today. They hum, gentle and low, like they're tuning up for choir practice. Your fingers are stiff from the cold as you gently check the thatchwork of the skep. No tears, no mold, no signs of mice. A good start. You rest your palm flat against the woven side and feel the subtle vibration, a living drumbeat. Bees don't sleep like you do. They just slow down, as if politely drowsing through winter sermons. You think of the villagers still sleeping in their drafty cottages. You, though, are the beekeeper. Or rather, a beekeeper. Medieval Europe is peppered with folks like you. Monks, peasants, priests, even nobles sometimes, though they're more likely to own bees than tend them. They like the honey but not the stings. Fair enough. Historians still argue whether beekeeping was more common in religious communities or rural villages, but either way, it's no small affair. In a world without sugarcane, honey is gold, liquid sunlight, sweetness pressed from flowers. You check another skep. This one's quieter. You place your ear near the entrance hole and hear a tiny sneeze. Probably not a real sneeze, but something close, a little puff of air from a bee flapping its wings to fast inside. There's a soft crunch behind you. You turn, half expecting a fox. It's only Father Cedric. He's wearing a robe too long for him and holding a small wooden box. Morning, apiarist, he says with a yawn. He always calls you that now, even though you're still pretty sure he didn't know what the word meant last month. Brought the wax scrapings. Sister Agnes wants them for her face balm again. You nod and reach for the box. Inside, chunks of amber-colored wax curl like old fruit rinds. Some still have bee legs embedded in them. You pretend not to notice. Father Cedric squints at the hives, as if hoping they'll recite scripture. Do you think the bees pray? He asks seriously. You shrug. They hum in Latin. He laughs softly, then coughs, then rubs his eyes and wanders off, leaving you alone again with the bees and the mist and the slow waking earth. You lean back and rest your hands in the grass, feeling the dew soak through the wool. Somewhere a lark begins to sing, but the bees drown it out. Their hum builds like a lullaby sung into your bones. This is the rhythm of your life now. Rise with the bees. Sleep when they sleep. Sting only when absolutely necessary. And no one really tells you this, but the bees kind of start to feel like tiny roommates. Bossy ones. Your left hand suddenly starts tingling. Just a warning from one curious bee who wants to sit on your sleeve. You freeze, breathe slow, and wait. Eventually she wanders off, probably disappointed by your lack of floral scent. You stay beside the hives a while longer. There's nothing dramatic about this work. No fireworks. No triumphs. Just the slow, steady practice of listening to the bees, the weather, your own breath. It's not thrilling, but it is deeply, profoundly real. You close your eyes for a moment and let the warmth of your lantern kiss your cheeks. The buzz settles into a sleepy drone, the kind that wraps around your thoughts like soft linen. One hive starts to buzz louder. A disagreement. Maybe. Someone brought home the wrong pollen. You sigh, pick yourself up, and prepare to step in. But gently. Always gently. You don't get far before a voice calls from the edge of the meadow. It's Father Cedric again, because of course it is. He's holding a staff that's more decorative than useful, waving it in what he clearly thinks is an urgent manner. You should talk to Brother Martin, he calls. He's been naming the bees again. You pause mid-step. Last time Brother Martin named the bees, he started assigning them monastic chores. One was supposedly in charge of candle wick inventory. Another was reprimanded for missing evening prayers. Still, it's hard not to like Brother Martin. He's old, stooped, and smells faintly of clover and overly ambitious theology. You find him not far off, crouched in the herb garden beside a small hive, whispering something about St. Ambrose. Did you know, he says without preamble, that Ambrose's mouth was filled with bees as a baby, a sign he'd speak sweetly. You nod politely. It's a story you've heard more than once. St. Ambrose, patron of beekeepers and eloquent words. The tale always sounds a bit alarming, if you're being honest. Bee-filled infants don't exactly scream peace and piety. But Brother Martin loves it. He leans in close. I've been asking the bees to pray for us, he says, lowering his voice as if this is classified information. You nod again. What else can you do? In truth, bees held a strange and sacred space in the medieval mind. Some people thought they came from heaven itself. Others swore bees were born from oxen carcasses, which feels like a wild misreading of both biology and bee preferences. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were widespread or fringe. But one thing's certain. Bees weren't just bugs. They were little, winged miracles. Some monasteries even held funerals for them when hives collapsed. The monks would chant psalms, sprinkle holy water, and sometimes, yes, really, ring tiny bells. You look at Brother Martin, who is now gently touching the top of the hive like he's checking for a fever. Careful, you murmur. They might not like your sermon. He grins without looking up. They like me better than Abbot Hugh. And that's what matters. You let him be and walk toward your own hives again. Fog's thinning now. The light has that watery, silver quality, like someone's hung a veil over the sun. You start humming to yourself. Nothing tuneful, just a low sound to keep the bees calm. Some keepers believe bees respond to singing. Others say it's the vibrations. You like to believe it's just good manners. A cart creaks nearby. You glance over your shoulder to see Sister Willa and 2 novices dragging a load of fresh straw. They're rethatching the chicken shed, which in theory shouldn't concern the bees, except the last time someone did roof work, a hammer startled the hives and 3 monks ended up with fat lips. You remember one of them sobbing into a carrot. It wasn't the pain, it was the betrayal. I was only eating turnips near them, he kept wailing. You return your attention to the nearest hive and reach for your hive stick. A curved, soot darkened tool used to prod, poke, and gently lift the skep for inspection. Not glamorous, but it gets the job done. You lift the edge of the hive just enough to peek beneath. Bees bustle in organized chaos, some working, others seeming to supervise. You spot a bit of bercombe near the entrance. That's good. It means they're building with energy. You pause and admire their industriousness. It's easy to forget how much bees do. They forage up to 5 miles. They communicate through wiggly dances. They make hexagons with more efficiency than your average tax collector. And no, you haven't found a queen, because no one here knows she exists yet. To you and your fellow medievals, a hive runs more like a monastery. Lots of boys, some kind of natural hierarchy. No clear female leadership unless you count Sister Willa's glare when someone spills broth. You've heard all the theories. Some think the king bee rules, even though no one's actually seen him doing anything remotely regal. Others believe the hive functions through divine harmony, like the stars, or like soup. Opinions vary. You bend and whisper something to the hive. You don't know why. Maybe it's habit. Maybe you just like imagining they're listening. Then you walk the line, checking each skep for signs of trouble, collapsed comb, signs of mice, anything unusual. One hive has a suspicious smell, faintly sour, like bad cheese left on a warm windowsill. You make a note to return later. Could be early rot, could be a mouse nest, could be another forgotten monk snack. At the final skep, you pause. This one's special. It's the oldest hive, the one given to you when you first took over after old Beata, the abbey's previous apiarist, retired. Technically, she didn't retire. She simply started sleeping more than working, then disappeared into the library muttering about celery seeds. But still, she left you her bees, and with them, her crooked hat and wooden spoon. You lift the spoon now and tap lightly on the skep. Just once. A habit. A greeting. Maybe a warning. Maybe both. The bees respond with a slightly louder hum, as if saying, "We hear you. Now go away." You smile. Message received. Your feet are cold now. The grass is drying but the chill is bone deep. You sit down on an overturned bucket, watching the meadow shift slowly from gray to pale green. Another day of buzzing. Another day of quiet. And despite everything, the fog, the chill, the strange half-religious, half-ridiculous rituals, it's comforting. There's something to be said for a world where your biggest worry before breakfast is whether a bee's in a good mood. You stretch, yawn, and feel your shoulder pop like dry thatch. The sun finally peeks over the tree line, and the hives light up golden. And you're exactly where you're meant to be. The fog finally burns off as the sun rises a little higher, and now you're not alone in the field. Birds are flitting overhead. A pair of goats have escaped from somewhere they were very much meant to be, and two young boys are pretending to be knights with sticks, while also definitely eyeing your hives with the same expression a raccoon reserves for unattended pies. You rise from your bucket and casually shift a hive entrance toward the sun. It's something you've learned helps the bees orient themselves, like giving them a front porch light. Besides, it looks deliberate, and the boys back off. Good. Last week one of them tried to train a bee to joust. As you make your way toward the edge of the abbey garden, you pass a tall wooden post with an old scrap of parchment nailed to it, barely legible after last week's rain. You know what it says, though, something to the effect of, "By order of the bailiff, any who tamper with bees shall be fined or flogged." It's not just an idle threat. Bees were serious property in medieval times. Some towns even had official bee wardens who inspected hives and investigated complaints, like if your bees wandered into another man's orchard. Spoiler alert, the bees always deny it. Historians still argue whether these bee-related laws were widely enforced or more symbolic, but there's no denying that beekeeping had a legal aura around it. In some parts of medieval England, it was illegal to kill a bee, especially if that bee belonged to a lord or a monastery. And if you stole honey, that wasn't petty theft. That was a full-on felony. Depending on your region, it might cost you a hefty fine or a few public whacks with a stick. You once heard of a man punished for beehive meddling. The local priest insisted the punishment involve a pig, a procession, and strong words. No one explains the pig. No one wants to. You walk along a narrow path lined with thyme and lavender, the scents chasing away the last tendrils of morning cold. Bees flit past your face, landing briefly on a cluster of flowers before darting off again, likely unimpressed with your lack of petals. As you approach the garden wall, you notice Sister Willa scolding a novice. The poor girl is holding a pot of honey upside down, looking dismayed at the puddle of golden goo now attracting every ant in the hemisphere. Spilled tithes, Sister Willa mutters. The bees won't like that. You're not sure if she means the insects or the monks, but either way, you step around the mess with care. In truth, honey has more value than most villagers' coin purses. Taxes are sometimes paid in honey. Rent, too. You've seen entire scrolls in the abbey's dusty records room documenting trades like to pints of clover honey in exchange for a roof repair, or a bucket of wildflower honey for one medium-sized sheep. People use honey for everything: sweetener, medicine, offering, bribe. It's as good as silver, and far tastier. One particularly clever man once paid his taxes with honeycomb shaped like the abbess's initials. That man is now in charge of bees in 3 parishes. You remember when Brother Fennel tried to distill honey into something drinkable and ended up inventing a syrup so powerful it put 3 nuns to sleep mid-chant. They didn't wake up until the next psalm. And then there's the wax, not as sweet, but arguably more prized, used for everything from candle making to sealing letters to smoothing violin strings. If violin strings had been invented yet, which they haven't, never mind. You continue onto the old ledger house, where the scribe, Brother Ulrich, sits hunched at his desk. His ink-stained fingers flutter over parchment like bees over a blossom. He glances up. More wax expected this month. Only if they don't fly south, you reply, which earns a raised eyebrow and a faint smile. Ulrich's job includes recording how much wax goes to candle making, how much honey is gifted to visiting clergy, and how much is quietly pilfered by the kitchen for recipe testing. The monks deny this, but the abbey dog smells suspiciously like gingerbread on feast days. Ulrich flips through a record, finds a line you know by heart: 2 skeps gifted from Lord Merrick, wax to be used only for Easter candles. You know those skeps. They're finicky and aggressive, and prefer to build comb sideways for reasons known only to bees. Keep them producing, Ulrich says. Abbot wants tall candles this year. You resist the urge to say that if the abbot wants tall candles, he can start contributing pollen. Instead, you nod and step out into the courtyard again, where sunlight is now full and golden. You pass under a wooden beam strung with drying herbs, sage, rosemary, and something that may or may not be nettle. A bee bumps against your collarbone, then zips away. You pause at the water trough, not because you're thirsty, but because the bees are. Some hover over the surface, sipping delicately. You marvel at the fact that even in a medieval world filled with noise, bells, sermons, the occasional goat argument, this one moment is entirely still. Just the sound of wings, just the soft ripple of water, just the feel of sun on your back and the gentle buzz in your ears. Here, in this field, you're not just a beekeeper. You're a listener, a translator, maybe even a bit of a priest. You tend to tiny congregants with wings and 100 eyes, who speak in dances and feed on sunlight. And somehow, you've convinced yourself they recognize you, or at least tolerate you more than the chickens do. You close your eyes and breathe deep. Lavender, old wood, wax, and that faint, golden scent of honey in the air. Just another morning in the business of bees. You're halfway back across the meadow when you hear the distinctive low thump of someone face-planting into the dirt. Again, you turn slowly and see Edgar, the newest novice, struggling to untangle himself from a clump of wild rye. His hood is pulled halfway over his face, one boot's missing, and he's somehow managed to smear honey on both knees without any visible jar. Impressive. Bee check, you ask. Bee pursuit, he gasps, standing up and brushing dirt from his tunic. One flew into my cowl. You raise an eyebrow. I panicked, he admits. You offer him a small, slightly pitying smile and wave him off with a "you'll live." He gives a thumbs up and limps away in the direction of the bakehouse, presumably to recover his dignity with a sticky bun. You shake your head and return your attention to the hives. Today's task: checking the skeps for structural wear. Unlike modern beekeepers with tidy wooden boxes, your medieval setup leans heavily on straw, wool, and hope. Wicker skeps are hand-woven domes, sometimes daubed with mud or dung to strengthen them against wind and rain. The best ones look like upside-down laundry baskets. The worst ones collapse at the first sneeze. This one, your oldest, has seen better days. The edge is fraying, and part of the thatch has come loose where some creature, rabbit, fox, aggressive nun, had a go at it. You lift it gently, peering underneath, and instantly flinch. A spider has claimed it for its own. You retreat with the dignity of someone who pretends it was always part of the plan. You grab your repair kit, really just a cloth satchel with straw twists, some fine rope, a bone needle, and a small flat stone for hammering things that refuse to behave. You sit cross-legged, resting the skep across your knees like a sleeping cat, and begin threading the straw with care. It's a quiet task, hypnotic. The bees mostly ignore you, which is the highest compliment they give. You're neither food nor threat. You are, in their eyes, furniture. The repairs take time. Each straw must be snug, tight, and woven in a pattern so regular it could hypnotize the moon. This isn't artistry, it's function. Still, there's something pleasing about how it all fits together. Historians still argue whether the weaving patterns held meaning, regional signatures, perhaps, or visual prayers. Some even suggest that beekeepers wove subtle signs into the skeps, like marks of ownership or hidden blessings. You can't say. You're too busy trying to thread a needle through damp straw with fingers still cold from dew. You finally tie off the last knot and lean back, holding the skep up to the light. It's not perfect, but it will hold. You place it gently back on its hive board and whisper, "You're welcome," to the bees inside. They don't answer, but a small gust of wind stirs the grass, and you take that as thanks. You make a mental note. Thatching will need to be redone come midsummer. You'll need help. Not from Edgar. Around you, the meadow's alive now. The bees are fully awake, darting between clover and knapweed. You watch them closely, not with suspicion, but with the practiced eye of someone who knows their moods. A healthy hive buzzes with rhythm and purpose. A troubled hive sounds disjointed, uneven, like a choir where the altos have given up. One skep sounds off. You tilt your head, not louder, just thinner. A high-pitched whine instead of the usual warm hum. You squat beside it and listen closely. There's a hole in the back. Tiny, jagged, maybe a rodent, or a bored bird. You groan softly and begin patching it with mud and straw, packing the mixture in with your fingers like you're stuffing pie crust into a leek. As you work, you recall a tale Brother Martin once shared over lentil stew, about a beekeeper who painted blessings onto each skep using milk and ash, believing it kept pests away. Others swore by hanging bits of garlic or singing hymns while harvesting. You mostly rely on vigilance, a sharp stick, and a long stare. Your patch holds. The bees hum louder, either approving or complaining. You accept both as encouragement. You lean back and wipe your hands on your cloak. The mud leaves satisfying smears, and for once, you don't mind. Beekeeping isn't tidy work. It's sticky, itchy, and full of things that want to crawl up your sleeve. You glance toward the abbey where the bell tolls for terce. Morning prayers. You should go, technically, but the bees won't wait. And besides, you've prayed enough today, with straw, with hands, with quiet observation. The monks will understand, or not. Either way, the bees have more pressing needs. You pull out your ledger. A little book of notes passed down from apiarist to apiarist, each page full of smudges, scribbles, and accidental honey stains. You jot, third skep west side, patched hole, possible rodent interest, monitor buzz, a thrilling entry, you know. At the bottom of the page is a sketch, probably drawn by old Beata, of a bee wearing a tiny crown. You smile. She always insisted they deserved it. Another gust of wind stirs the grass, and a single bee lands on your boot. It pauses, turns in a circle, then flies off without fanfare. That's the medieval version of a 5-star review. You return to your bucket perch and watch the bees dart and dive, tracing unseen paths in the air. You wonder if they know how much their lives matter here, not just for honey, but for candles, for healing, for trade. You suspect they don't care. And that's part of what makes it all work. You're halfway through your second bowl of stewed turnips, the breakfast of champions and people with limited options, when someone barges into the kitchen muttering about smoke. You don't immediately react. There's always smoke in a medieval abbey. Most of it's supposed to be there. But then you hear the word hives and suddenly, your spoon, and so interesting. You grab your cloak, still damp from yesterday's mist, and bolt toward the field. Smoke is billowing from the far side of the apiary, thick, gray, and unmistakably mossy. not a fire, a smoker. Which is a relief until you remember you haven't lit a smoker today. You reach the hives just in time to see young Cedric, different from Father Cedric. Less robe, more enthusiasm, frantically waving a bundle of smoldering moss at a skep like he's conducting an angry symphony. They looked upset. He yells, eyes watering, I thought I'd help. You gently, but firmly, take the smoker from him and drop it in a bucket. The bees, understandably, are in a mood. A few have already formed what you might generously call a displeased cloud. You usher Cedric away with the calmness of someone who is screaming internally. Once he's gone, you kneel beside the hive and examine the damage. Fortunately, the moss is wet enough that the smoke didn't catch anything on fire. The bees are rattled, but the structure's intact. You sit back on your heels and exhale. Smoke, when used properly, is one of your best tools. It doesn't knock bees out, as some novices assume. Instead, it masks the pheromones they use to communicate danger. A few puffs of cool, dry smoke near the entrance, and the hive becomes just confused enough to ignore you. But moss needs to be chosen carefully, dry, aromatic, and slow burning. What Cedric used was probably kitchen moss. It smells faintly of parsnips and rage. You remember the first time you learned how to smoke a hive properly. Beata showed you, squinting through the haze with one eye and muttering about gentleman bees and keeping one's eyebrows. You kept both, though only just. You fetch your own smoker, a clay pot with a vented lid and a handle wrapped in leather. Inside, you place a few dry moss curls and some crumbled sage. The scent, when lit, is oddly calming, like incense meant for bees. You light it and test the smoke. Thin, white, and cool. Perfect. You step to the nearest hive, hold the smoker near the entrance, and give to short puffs. The sound inside shifts almost instantly. The bees pause, regroup, and resume their work, like someone hit pause on a mild argument and then forgot why they were mad. You gently lift the skep and peek beneath. Bees bustling, comb golden, movement calm. You make a note to harvest from this one in a few weeks, just enough to share with the kitchen. You're still trying to get a second bowl of porridge named after you. Historians still argue whether medieval beekeepers understood exactly why smoke worked or if they just knew it did. Theories abounded. Smoke appeased forest spirits, calmed the hive's guardian soul, or lulled bees with the scent of the divine. Your theory is simpler. Bees don't like surprises. You finish your check and turn toward the next skep, pausing only when you hear Cedric's voice drifting from behind a nearby hedge. They didn't sting me, he's insisting. That means I'm chosen. You sigh and make a mental note to keep him away from the mead next feast day. Back at the hives, you continue your rounds. Smoke, inspect, note. Each hive has its own mood. Some are docile, others testy. One particular skep, built from a slightly darker straw, seems to hum at a lower pitch, like it's in a constant state of medieval bassoon. You've learned to match your handling style to each hive's personality. The high-strung hive, gentle movements. The lazy one, a bit of noise to wake them. The dramatic one near the path. Well, that one gets compliments and a bribe of extra flowers. You remember a story Beata once told about a monk who tried to impress a visiting bishop by presenting a hive mid-harvest, only to have the bees take offense and chase the holy man across the cloister. The bishop fell into a vat of pickled eels. The bees were declared temporarily excommunicated, but eventually forgiven. You grin, imagining the scene, and move on to the last hive of the row. This one's trickier. It's an older design, with a removable board at the bottom and a wax plug where someone once tried to install a bee door. It was meant to allow only polite bees to enter. It failed. Still, the hive's strong. You give it a few wisps of smoke and carefully remove the board. Inside, the combs hang like curtains, amber and gold, some capped, some oozing gently at the sides. You resist the urge to poke it. That never ends well. You study the wax closely. The comb is neat, almost geometrically smug. No mold, no sagging. You spot a line of brood cells, future bees, tucked into hexagonal cradles. You whisper an automatic blessing. Some beekeepers recite entire prayers during inspection. Others sing. You lean more toward muttered affirmations and the occasional "there we go." It seems to work. You replace the board, puff one last breath of smoke, and step back. The meadow is calm now. The smoke lingers like fog's quieter cousin. You watch it drift through the grass and curl around your boots, carrying with it the scent of herbs and old rituals. You wonder, sometimes, what people in the far future will think of all this. If they'll marvel at how you kept bees without gloves, without suits, just intuition, patience, and an extremely high tolerance for stings in unexpected places. Maybe they'll think you foolish, or maybe they'll envy the quiet. You sit down in the grass and close your eyes for a moment, listening not just to the bees, but to everything: the wind in the trees, the faint splash of water in the trough, the distant clang of a dropped pot in the kitchen. The world, in this moment, is full but not loud, busy but not rushing, and for now, the bees are calm, and that's enough. The village bell rings faintly in the distance, and you know it's market day. That means the abbey's modest stash of honey and wax will soon be packed into a cart, along with pickled turnips, dried herbs, and the world's least enthusiastic chicken. You've named her Gertrude. She hates everything. You follow the clatter of wheels down the slope toward the cart yard, passing villagers setting up stalls with fabrics, pottery, and, most dangerously, songs they've written themselves. One man singing about a trout that stole his heart. You stare wide. At the cart, Sister Willa is supervising to brothers with the posture of someone who's done this 100 times and doesn't trust anyone else to do it even once. You brought the wax blocks, she asks without looking at you. You nod and set them down, heavy, golden bricks that smell faintly of summer. Wax is more valuable than most people think. A single brick can be bartered for a pair of sturdy boots or 3 chickens, depending on how desperate the chickens are. You remembered to scrape the combs clean, she asks, finally turning to look you in the eye. I remembered, you reply, which is mostly true. She grunts her approval and points to a small pouch. Inside are 4 tiny candles, just wide enough to fit in the abbey's travel lanterns, each one wrapped in cloth and tied with twine. They go to Father Arnulf. He says he's tired of praying in the dark. You suppress the urge to comment that Father Arnulf falls asleep mid-prayer, whether it's light or not. Instead, you pick up the pouch and secure it in the cart. A few bees hover nearby, curious but not aggressive. Sister Willa flicks one gently away from her veil. They always follow the wax, she mutters, like monks to soup. The cart driver, a man named the Beau, who always smells faintly of cheese and ambition, arrives with the oxen. He eyes the honey pots like they might turn into gold coins if he stares hard enough. You're not sampling this time, Willa says sternly. I wasn't going to. He lies, already reaching for a pot. You smack his hand with the flat of your spoon. You didn't plan to bring the spoon, but somehow it's always with you. A beekeeper's instinct. The Beau mutters something about quality control and begins hitching the oxen. You give the cart one last check. Honey secured, wax wrapped, candles padded with straw. You tap the side for luck, though no one's sure if that actually does anything. As the cart rolls away, Sister Willa sighs. If half of that arrives, I'll call it a miracle. You don't disagree. Last month, the Beau somehow managed to deliver an entire shipment upside down. The honey soaked into the cloth bundles and created what the village children called the world's tastiest socks. Still, the honey trade is serious business. While gold may glitter and silver may clink, honey is the one thing everyone wants. Even the grumpiest townspeople will trade for it, especially during winter, when sweetness is scarce and coughs are plentiful. Historians still argue whether medieval honey markets were seasonal or year-round. Some suggest traveling apiarists sold door to door. Others claim it was largely monastery-controlled. All you know is that people love beeswax like it's magic. You walk back toward the hives, your boots squelching slightly from an unfortunate puddle you failed to avoid earlier. The air is warmer now, the kind of warm that softens bones and makes you think about naps in hay lofts. A group of children are watching the meadow from behind a low stone wall. They giggle every time a bee flies near, then scream theatrically and scatter. You raise a hand in mock salute, and they wave back, bravely. As you reach the hives, you notice a small figure crouched near one of the skeps. It's little Odo, the potter's boy, cheeks smudged and hands covered in what looks like molasses. Odo, you begin, warily. I thought bees liked sweet things, he says. You crouch beside him and examine the puddle of stickiness he's left near the hive entrance. They do, you say carefully, but they don't like confusion. He looks contrite. You hand him a bit of moss and instruct him to wipe up the mess before the bees stage a formal protest. As he scrubs, you explain gently, they need clear smells. Molasses smells like a drunk plum. Bees get suspicious. He nods solemnly, even though you're fairly certain he'll do it again next week. Still, there's something comforting about teaching the younger ones. You remember when Beata first showed you how to check a hive's mood by listening to the pitch of its buzz. If it sounds like angry bagpipes, she'd said, come back later. You help Odo to his feet and send him off with strict instructions to keep sweet things at least 10 paces from the hives. He promises. You don't believe him. The rest of the day passes slowly, in the way that only bee days can. You inspect combs, scrape old wax, gently redirect confused drones back into their skeps. One bee spends a solid 5 minutes climbing up your sleeve and getting lost in your elbow. You wait patiently until it finds its way out, triumphant and possibly embarrassed. In the late afternoon, you gather the leftover wax scrapings and carry them to the Abbey workshop, where candles are molded in long iron forms. The air in here always smells of resin, tallow, and the sharp bite of lavender oil someone spilled 6 months ago and refused to admit. You pour the wax gently, watching it settle in the mold like golden pudding. One of the brothers hands you a wick. It's goat hair, tightly twisted, and you lower it into the center of the form with steady fingers. Each candle is a little prayer, a little light against the vast, dark evenings. You like knowing your bees have a role in that. You leave the candles to cool and step out into the late afternoon sun, stretching your back and sighing deeply. The bees are still working. Of course, they don't have the luxury of tea breaks. They'll go until dusk, then huddle together in their combs for warmth, dreaming of clover and long summer days. You sit by the apiary one last time, scribbling notes in your ledger, humming a lullaby that your grandmother swore made the bees dance. You've never seen them dance to it. But then again, maybe they only do it when you're not looking. There's something odd about this hive. You've been watching it for the better part of a week, tilting your head, narrowing your eyes, adjusting your expectations, and still, it doesn't make sense. This skep, third from the left, behaves differently. The bees are slower, the hum is lower, and there's something missing, something you can't quite name. This morning, as the sun slides over the thatched roof and gilds the meadow in quiet gold, you kneel before it and press your ear to the straw. Nothing, not silence, exactly, more like uncertainty, hesitation. You lift the lid gently. The comb inside is tidy, perhaps too tidy. You've seen this before, but only once, and even then, you didn't quite believe it. There's no queen. Of course, you don't know it's a queen, not in the way a modern apiarist would. In your world, bees have kings, or so people say. One great bee who leads the rest with dignity and diplomacy. It makes sense, they claim. A noble order of insects led by a noble ruler. Patriarchy with wings. But the truth is, no one has ever seen this king doing anything particularly kingly. No crown, no throne, no speeches, and certainly no interest in statcraft. Historians still argue whether medieval beekeepers suspected the presence of a single central leader or assumed the hive was governed by collective mood. Some records mention the big bee. Others say the hive is ruled by harmony, or sometimes, by God. You sit back on your heels and squint at the skep. Something has happened here, something quiet and strange. Without a queen, or rather, without whatever it is that makes the hive tick, the colony grows listless. You reach into your cloak pocket and pull out a feather. Light, white, and utterly ineffective as a bee tool, but you use it to nudge one of the combs gently aside, revealing only a few sluggish workers and a handful of untouched brood cells. The hive isn't dead, not yet. But it's missing its center. Maybe she flew off, you murmur. Maybe she saw the rent and decided to move. It wouldn't be the first time a swarm left abruptly. It's called absconding. But that sounds too official for something so emotional. Sometimes, bees just leave. They vanish, leaving behind a half-hearted legacy of wax and stale air. You remember one time when Beata found a whole skep emptied overnight. Not robbed, not eaten, just gone. She spent 3 days muttering about signs and omens before deciding it was probably mice. You exhale and tap your spoon? Yes, it's back in your hand again, against your knee. This hive needs help, not the kind of help that comes from poking or scolding. No, it needs hope, structure, and maybe a little deception. You close the skep carefully and rise to your feet, brushing straw from your robes. Your plan is simple. Take a comb from a thriving hive, one with fresh brood and a lively hum, and insert it gently into this one. If the bees are willing, they may accept it. They may even raise a new queen, though again, you don't use that word. You fetch a small reed basket, padded with moss, and walk to the stronger hive near the lavender hedge. This skep is noisy, joyful, almost cocky in its buzz. The kind of hive that makes you feel like the bees are talking about you behind your back, but kindly. You smoke them lightly, lift the lid, and search for a suitable comb, fresh, golden, with tiny white larvae nestled in their waxy cradles. You find one near the center and slice it free with your hive knife, the wax parting with a soft sigh. You place it into the basket and return to the quiet hive. You open the skep once more, feel the cooler air inside, and gently nestle the borrowed comb into place. The bees stir, uncertain. You murmur a nonsense blessing under your breath and close the lid. And then you wait. This part isn't dramatic. There are no trumpets, no banners waving, just time. Bees are slow to decide. Like monks, they weigh each action, each change, with a kind of stubborn grace. But sometimes, with luck, they'll choose to stay. They'll raise a new ruler, a queen who is, by your reckoning, just another bee, but different, bigger, quieter, central. You sit nearby with your spoon and your notebook, scribbling small notes. Hive 3 quiet, comb added, possible renewal. That question mark is doing a lot of work. You wonder if there are stories about this sort of thing. There are always bee stories. Beata used to say that when a hive swarms, it's seeking paradise, that they fly toward Eden, and when they don't find it, they come back, changed. She once claimed she saw a swarm form the shape of a chalice. No one else saw it, but she insisted. The bees in the quiet hive are stirring now, moving around the new comb, inspecting, tasting, whispering. If bees whisper, you lean forward, breath shallow, no stings. That's a good sign. You allow yourself a small smile and stand, joints protesting, and stretch your arms toward the wide, blue sky. A hawk circles overhead, disinterested in bees, very interested in mice. You wave to it anyway. Everyone deserves a greeting. You'll return tomorrow to check again. No use hovering. The bees know their rhythm better than you ever could. And if this works, if they raise a new center, you'll have saved a hive. Quietly, patiently, with a spoon and a whisper. And if not, well, there's always another swarm to follow. The calendar hanging inside the Abbey storage room is a work of art and confusion, 12 panels painted in faintly wobbly colors, each depicting a monk doing something vaguely agricultural and possibly unrelated. In January, he's cutting firewood. In April, he's weeping into a plow. In September, he's standing on a ladder and throwing apples at someone just off frame. You've always found the monk in July particularly inspiring. He's asleep under a tree, mouth wide open, a half-eaten fig in one hand. That's the dream. You sit before the calendar now, a piece of chalk in one hand, your ledger in the other. You've been tasked with updating the beekeeping schedule, not because anyone expects you to improve it, but because the last update was written in Latin and smeared with what you sincerely hope was ink. The medieval beekeeper's year, in flashy, but it's relentless. You know this by heart. Of course, every month brings a new set of small, precise tasks that together form the great, gentle wheel of hive care. January is for resting. For both you and the bees, you wrap the skeps in burlap or wool. Check for leaks. Make sure the entrances aren't blocked with ice or the feathers of overly curious chickens. The bees cluster deep inside, vibrating softly to keep warm. You bring them offerings of stale bread dipped in honey water and whisper good wishes. The monks think it's superstition. You call it manners. February, you poke your head outside the window, see snow, and immediately regret it. Still, you check the hives. Carefully, you listen for sound. No buzzing means worrying. Soft buzzing means hope. March is when the world begins to stretch and blink again. You feed the bees extra if stores are low. Some say you should sing to them on the equinox. You did once. The hive ignored you. April is when the fun begins. Flowers bloom. Bees fly. Your legs ache from chasing swarms that always head for the roof. Or worse, the chimney. You once found a swarm inside Father Cedric's sock drawer. He insisted it was divine punishment for hoarding the good jam. May is your busiest month. Swarm season hits full stride. You patrol like a guard, smoker in hand, spoon at your belt. You lure stray bees into new skeps with sweet herbs and silent pleas. You always get stung at least once. If you're lucky, gnaw on your nose again. Historians still argue whether medieval beekeepers used swarm-catching techniques similar to modern methods. Some claim they used banging pans and clapping. Others mention incense and bells. You favor lavender oil and patience. Loud noises seem to annoy the bees and terrify the goats. June, the combs are full. You check them carefully, judging whether the time has come to harvest. You leave plenty behind. Of course, it's a partnership, not a robbery. Some monks forget that. The bees do not. July, you begin the harvest. Carefully, with apologies, you use a sharp knife to cut comb, trying not to disrupt the brood cells. You hum under your breath, old lullabies your grandmother swore bees liked. You get stung anyway. August, you render wax in the summer heat. It's a sweaty, sticky job, made only marginally better by the fact that the Abbey kitchen smells like honey for a full week afterward. Candles get poured. Labels, such as they are, get scribbled. You lose at least one candle mold to mice. Again, September, you prepare for the turn. You consolidate weaker hives. Add insulation. Check stores. Bees are busy, too, racing to fill cells before the frost. The meadow smells like apples and anxiety. October, you trap heat. Plug holes. Tuck in the edges of burlap wraps. Your back aches from carrying skeps to higher ground. Someone always forgets and leaves one by the river. Someone always has to fish it out. Usually you. November. The bees are quiet. You check for moisture, for mold. You knock softly on each skep like you're visiting old friends. The response is always a warm hum, or sometimes, silence. You always hope for the former. December. You thank them, whether aloud or just with a hand resting on the straw dome. The candles burn in the Abbey windows. Some of that light, came from your bees. That thought stays with you. You finish transcribing the calendar, adding small doodles next to each month. Little bees with halos, a monk frowning at a swarm, a goat wearing a beekeeper's hat. You're not an artist, but your intentions are clear. The Abbey bell tolls none, and you stretch your spine until it pops like a dry wax seal. Then you tuck the ledger under your arm and head out to the hives. It's early spring again, the meadow soft and full of promise. You walk from skep to skep, murmuring greetings, checking that each is breathing quietly. The sun is low, the light that rich honey gold that seems too beautiful to last. You pause by your quiet hive, the one you tried to save with the new comb. It's still subdued, but there's movement now. A new sound, not loud, not lively, but warmer, like the hive is holding its breath and just beginning to exhale. You smile and take a seat on the grass, careful to avoid the ant path that always ends up in your boot. You pull out the calendar again and glance at next month's notes. It reads, inspect, repair, rejoice. Seems simple enough. You lean back against a sun-warmed stone and watch a bee crawl along your sleeve, then take off, zigzagging into the blue. A new season begins. Later that evening, The chapel fills with the soft murmur of evening prayers, the kind that drift upward like smoke and get lost somewhere in the rafters. You sit in the back row, partly because you arrive late, mostly because you're still wearing a smear of wax across your shoulder and smell faintly of thyme. The room is dim, lit mostly by candles made from your beeswax. Their light flickers gently, casting golden glows onto the stone walls and highlighting the fine dust caught in the chapel's still air. You've always liked this time of day, not for the prayers necessarily, though they have their place, but for the quiet. The final hymn begins, soft and slow, sung in Latin and layered in harmony. You know some of the words, most of the tune, and none of the reason why it always makes you a little sleepy. You suspect the bees would approve of the rhythm. When the last amen fades, the monks file out, sandals scuffing faintly on the flagstones. You linger, not out of devotion, but because your eyes have drifted up toward the tiny wooden alcove near the altar where, just barely visible, sits a carving of a bee. You'd noticed it once by accident, during a particularly long sermon. At first you thought it was a bird, or maybe a misshapen angel. But no, someone, long ago, carved a bee, just one, tucked beside St. Madwena's elbow, as if offering her a sip of sweetness. You asked Father Cedric about it once. He shrugged and said it was probably symbolic, representing diligence, humility, or divine order. Or maybe it was a tribute to Saint Gabnate. Now there's a story. Saint Gabnate, the patron saint of beekeepers, lived in Ireland and was known, among other things, for using bees to chase off thieves. The tale goes that robbers came to her village, snatched up some cattle, and ran. Gabnate prayed, waved her hands, and unleashed her hives like tiny, furious guards. The bees swarmed, stung, and quite literally drove the thieves back, flailing and covered in welts. It said the cattle were returned unharmed, though likely a little bewildered. The robbers swore never to cross a beekeeper again. Historians still argue whether Gabnate ever kept bees herself or simply inspired those who did. Some say the legend grew from real village stories of swarms being seen as sacred. Others believe it's entirely allegorical, meant to remind the faithful that small things, properly organized, can protect entire communities. You rather like that idea. You stand, stretch, and make your way to the vestry, where candles are stored between services. Most are your handiwork, some plain, some molded with subtle designs, spirals, vines, tiny honeycombs. You run a finger along one with a thumbprint in its base. You remember making that one during a storm, hands cold and wax barely melted. The door creaks, and Sister Willa appears, holding a small jar wrapped in cloth. For the boy's cough, she says, he won't take the syrup without honey. You nod, take the jar, and carefully spoon in a rich layer from the comb you saved this morning. Dark, fragrant, full of clover and something else you can't name. She nods once and vanishes again. That's how most conversations go with Willa. Brief, purposeful, entirely efficient. You step outside into the evening air, cooler now, touched by wood smoke and the distant scent of baking bread. The stars are just starting to emerge, poking shyly through the dusk. You can hear the soft sound of bees settling in, their hives quieting, the meadow breathing out after a long day. You head toward your favorite tree, an old apple, bent sideways from years of wind, and lean against its trunk. From here, you can see the full line of skeps, all dark shapes against the silver of the grass. You watch, listening not just for sound but for stillness. It's then you remember another superstition, this one whispered by Brother Martin as he dried herbs last summer. He claimed that bees must be told when their keeper dies. If not, he said, they'll grow restless, stop making honey, and eventually fly away in mourning. So, if a beekeeper passes, it's tradition, at least in some villages, to go to each hive, knock 3 times, and deliver the news aloud. You're to tell them who has died, how, and what will happen next. You find this both absurd and deeply touching. You imagine, for a moment, what you'd say to your own bees if that day ever came. Would they understand? Would they mourn? Would they care? Maybe, maybe not, but you'd tell them anyway. You exhale, watching your breath curl into the night air. You take a slow walk past each hive, not checking, not tending, just being, letting them know you're here, letting the day settle. At the last skep, you rest a hand gently on the thatch. It's warm, faintly pulsing with life, 1,000 tiny heartbeats. Sleep well, you murmur. You've earned it. Then you turn and walk back toward the abbey, where a fire waits in the hearth, and your bed smells faintly of beeswax and clean hay. And the stars above watch it all, quietly, patiently, as they always have. The next morning begins with a kind of quiet that feels suspicious. No clattering pots, no shouting about goats, no distant bellow from Thibaut insisting he didn't technically eat the storage cheese. Just birdsong and the low, familiar drone of bees warming themselves for the day. You step outside, blinking against the soft gold of early sunlight, and stretch your arms overhead. Something pops in your back in a way that feels both concerning and inevitable. Your first stop is always the same, the hives. Not out of necessity. Most days they don't need anything, but because it feels right. Like saying good morning to a housemate who doesn't talk back, but pays the rent in honey. The meadow greets you with that earthy, buzzing peace. Clover pokes through the damp grass. Bees hop between blooms with the grace of tipsy dancers. You kneel beside the nearest skep, lay your hand against the straw, and wait for the faint hum to rise up into your bones. Still alive, still working, still bees. But today, you've brought something new. A face hood. Well, calling it a hood is generous. It's a square of old linen, frayed at the corners, with a veil sewn in using thread that might once have been part of a sock. You fashioned it last week after taking one sting to many to the nose and finally admitting that you, too, have limits. You tie the hood in place and catch your reflection in the water trough. You look ridiculous, like a ghost attempting to join a masquerade. But you feel safer. Just enough cloth between your cheeks and potential disaster to let you inspect the hives without flinching every time someone buzzes too close. Historians still argue whether medieval beekeepers used protective gear. Some images show men barefaced and grinning next to their hives. Others depict elaborate veils and long gloves. More likely, people just tolerated stings and developed thick skins, literally and metaphorically. You'd like to believe some enterprising soul once sewed a beekeeping robe out of old bedsheets and mild desperation. And if not, well, you'll be the first. You reach for your hive spoon again. Why do you always have it? And begin your rounds. The bees don't seem to mind your new look. One lands briefly on your hood, then flits away, unimpressed. Each skep gets a light tap, a listening ear, a glance at the entrance. You note the traffic, bees coming and going. Some returning heavy with pollen, others stopping to do their strange little dances. You pause at the third skep, where the replacement comb now sits comfortably. The hum has deepened since yesterday. It's not jubilant yet, but it's steadier, fuller, like a song finding its rhythm. You whisper encouragement, knowing full well they don't need it. Then, from the far side of the meadow, you hear a shriek. Not an alarming shriek, exactly, more like the kind that follows someone stepping barefoot into a hedgehog. You sigh, untie your hood, and head toward the sound. It's Edgar. Of course it is. He's kneeling beside a patch of mint, staring at his hands. They followed me, he says, wide-eyed. Did you steal something sweet again? You ask. I thought it was monastic jam. It was honey. He looks genuinely distressed. My apologies to the bees. You guide him toward the trough to rinse off his hands, resisting the urge to ask why he thought hiding honey in his pockets was a good idea. You decide he's suffered enough. His dignity is already buzzing off into the distance. Back at the hives, you grab your repair kit and move onto the skep by the old tree, the one that always slants just slightly to the left, as if trying to eavesdrop on your thoughts. The edge is fraying again. You sit cross-legged, pull out your straw twists, and begin weaving. It's oddly meditative. Each thread passed through the structure is like stitching time together. You hum quietly to yourself, losing track of the rhythm and falling into a loop of notes that sound vaguely like a lullaby. As you work, you think about the many things bees give besides honey and wax. They give order, purpose, Something to do when your mind grows restless. You've seen it in others too. Sister Willa, when she kneels by the hives, murmuring something that's half recipe, half prayer. Even Thibaut, who pretends he doesn't care, but once stood perfectly still for 10 minutes while a bee sat on his nose. The sun climbs higher. The bees buzz louder. The meadow fills with motion and scent. A dog barks in the distance, then immediately regrets it when a bee introduces itself to his nose. You finish your repair, tie off the final straw, and sit back. The hive leans into the sun. A few bees peek out, test the air, then retreat. You decide that's their version of waving. You make a quick loop around the other skeps, refreshing burlap wraps where needed, brushing away the beginnings of moss growth. Some keepers leave the moss, believing it wards off pests. You think it makes the hives look sleepy, like they've grown fur. Back in your corner of the meadow, you light your smoker, not to use, just for the comfort of the scent. Sage and dry moss mingle in the breeze, wrapping around you like a shawl. You sip from your tin cup, weak tea with honey, of course, and stretch your legs across the grass. You pull your ledger from your satchel and jot a few lines. New hood, effective. Dignity, questionable. Hive 3 stronger. Edgar, still learning. You sketch a tiny bee next to his name. It has a frown. You close the book, lean back against the sloping tree, and let your eyes drift half shut. The bees buzz on. The sun warms your face. Somewhere behind you, someone is singing the trout song again. But here, in the meadow, wrapped in the low hum of 1,000 tiny wings and the scent of thyme and straw, you let yourself rest. Because even keepers of bees deserve a moment to do nothing, especially when they've finally stopped getting stung in the face. You're elbow deep in beeswax and wondering how it all got quite this sticky when the village bell rings again, to short clangs and a long one. That particular sequence means only one thing. A swarm has left the hives. You sigh, wipe your hands on your already ruined apron, and begin the now familiar shuffle toward the meadow, trailing wax crumbs behind you like a very specific kind of medieval breadcrumb. Swarming is a perfectly normal part of the bee life cycle. When a colony gets too crowded, they send off a group of workers, plus a queen, to find a new home. It's both hopeful and inconvenient, like your best employees deciding to start a rival business halfway through the fiscal year. You pass 2 children on the path, both pointing excitedly toward the abbey wall. They flew that way, one says. They're headed for the chimney, says the other. Oh no, you mutter. You round the corner and, sure enough, find the swarm gathered in a dark clump near the roof line, buzzing like a tiny, disgruntled cloud. Bees cluster on a beam, just under the eaves, forming what looks like a soft, vibrating loaf of bread. You stare up at them, shielding your eyes from the sun. This is the part where you'd usually wave your smoker gently under the swarm to encourage it downward, or bang a pot, if you're feeling dramatic. Some keepers even sing. Instead, you fetch your swarm basket from the shed, a wide, flat cotton thing with a domed lid and a thin rope handle. You've padded the inside with lemon balm and a dab of honey, your own special blend of enticement and subtle bribe. You climb the ladder slowly, one hand for you, one for the basket, and position yourself under the swarm, hoping the bees are feeling cooperative. Swarming bees are usually docile. They're full of honey, and they don't have a home to defend. But usually doesn't mean always, and you've learned to never assume anything around insects with stingers and opinions. You give the beam a gentle knock with your spoon and whisper a quick encouragement. Come on down, the weather's lovely. And just like that, the swarm begins to drop, slowly, like golden syrup pouring from a spoon, falling into the basket with a soft, wet whisper of wings. You lower the lid gently, leaving a small gap for the others to follow. Some circle in lazy spirals overhead, considering your offer. Most accept. A few, as always, refuse on principle. You climb down carefully, basket in hand, and carry it to a fresh skep you prepared near the hedge. The bees seem pleased with your efforts, or at least not furious. It's a win either way. As you sit nearby, waiting for the last of the scouts to decide whether this real estate is acceptable, you overhear a conversation near the garden. Did you hear? A novice whispers. Old Greta says if bees swarm on a Tuesday, it means someone's going to get married or arrested, the other replies, depending on the wind. You smile faintly. Bees have always inspired wild theories, omens, prophecies, fortunes. A swarm might mean prosperity, or war, or rain, or thus that the hive was to warm and everyone inside had opinions about ventilation. Historians still argue whether swarming was seen as sacred or troublesome in medieval culture. Some abbeys documented each swarm as if it were a divine event. Others just wrote down the number of stings and moved on. You choose to believe swarms are messages, not from heaven, necessarily, but from the bees themselves. A polite notice that they've formed a committee, voted, and decided to start over somewhere with better views. As you sit by the new hive, you pull out your ledger and write. Swarm recovered. Settled in new skep. No casualties. Basket method successful. Ladder. Terrifying. You draw a little bee with wings raised in triumph. A soft buzz near your shoulder tells you one of the scouts has landed to investigate your sleeve. You freeze. Let her crawl a bit, then watch her lift off again, zipping toward the hive like a messenger with gossip. Soon after, the last of the stragglers trickles in. You seal the skep gently, leaving space for airflow, and tie the top with a bit of wool twine. Done. Well, mostly. The bees still have to accept the new location, the new neighbors, and, most importantly, the queen. If they lose her along the way, the whole endeavor fizzles. But judging by the noise inside, low, steady, and satisfied, you think she made it. You glance at the sun, now past its peak, and realize it's already mid-afternoon. You haven't eaten since breakfast. Your knees are coated in pollen, and your face smells faintly of lemon balm and triumph. Time for a break. You make your way to the kitchen, where a bowl of lentil stew waits lukewarm on the hearth. You spoon it up slowly, absent-mindedly dipping a crust of bread in honey and chewing while listening to the clatter and murmur of abbey life around you. As you eat, you overhear someone describing the swarm as a golden fog that moved with purpose, and someone else saying they're sure the bees spelled out the word hope in the sky. You roll your eyes, just a little, but say nothing. Let them have their stories? The bees wouldn't mind. Back outside, you walk past the new hive once more, just to check. Everything looks calm. You feel a strange sense of pride, not for the skill, exactly, but for the patience. Because beekeeping is never really about control. It's about listening, offering, waiting. Swarms remind you that everything can change in a moment, and that sometimes, starting over isn't failure. It's instinct. You rest your hand briefly on the skep and whisper, "Welcome home." Then you turn back toward the field, the chapel bell ringing somewhere far behind you, and the faint scent of beeswax still clinging to your sleeves. By evening, the meadow has quieted again, save for the lazy hum of a few late foragers making their final rounds before nightfall. The sun's dipping low, painting the sky with soft streaks of rose and apricot, and the grass glows in that final, fleeting way it only does at day's end. You're crouched beside the herb garden now, hands slick with salve and the faint, sticky perfume of beeswax. Sister Theda, the abbey's resident healer, has roped you into her latest batch of ointments. Apparently, your bees are now unofficial apothecaries. "Hold this," she says, handing you a wooden bowl filled with an alarming green paste. "What is it?" "Poultice," she replies, like that explains anything. "For boils, or cracked heels, or possessed feet. Depending on the application, you decide not to ask and hold the bowl carefully while she sprinkles in a pinch of dried rosemary and what might be powdered mushroom. Wax gives it the texture, she explains. Makes it stay put, like glue, but better smelling. You've helped her make salves before. The process always feels halfway between science and guesswork. She mashes herbs with a stone pestle, muttering about ratios and sacred geometry. Then she adds melted wax from your bees and waits until it cools into something smooth and golden and oddly reassuring. Today's batch includes comfrey, marigold, and something she insists is mildly numbing. You really hope it's not the nettle again. Historians still argue about the accuracy and efficacy of medieval remedies. Some were surprisingly advanced: wound salves with antibacterial properties, antiseptic honey poultices. Others were less helpful. One cure for headache involved rubbing a roasted mole across the temples. The mole did not survive. You've grown fond of Theda's methods, though. She doesn't lean on superstition too hard, and she always tests her remedies on her own elbows first. There's something comforting about that kind of commitment. She hands you a fresh linen strip dipped in warm wax. "Roll that," she says. "We're making joint wraps for the abbot." His knees sound like dry wood. You nod and begin wrapping the strip into a tight coil, letting the wax cool and stiffen slightly as you go. The scent is comforting, soft, floral, tinged with lavender and the faint smokiness of the rendering fire. "You ever use honey in medicine?" you ask, already knowing the answer. "Oh, all the time," she says. "Coughs, sore throats, skin burns. I once put it on a monk's eyebrow after he walked into a tree." "Did it help?" "His eyebrow came back shinier," she says, deadpan. You snort quietly and hand her the finished coil. She lines the salves and wraps on a wooden shelf, next to her labeled jars of dried flowers and roots. You spot one labeled Belegs, Misk. You don't ask. When the last pot is sealed with wax and a bit of parchment, she pats your shoulder with a wax-slicked hand. "You've got a good touch," she says. "Gentle. Bees like that." You wonder if that's true. You'd like to believe it is. You make your way back toward the apiary, the light dimming, the air cooler now, tinged with the crispness of the coming night. The skeps look like sleeping creatures, low and huddled. You can hear the soft murmur from inside. Less a buzz now, more a purr. You kneel beside your favorite hive and rest your hand on its side, palm flat against the straw. "They made medicine today," you whisper. "Not bad for bugs with no thumbs." A bee drifts lazily past your ear, does a slow circle around your head, and vanishes into the dusk. You like to think it's a good sign. You pull out your ledger and jot a few notes by the last light. Theda's salve successful. Wax strong. Smell tolerable. Belegs still unaccounted for. You draw a tiny jar with wings and a smile. Above you, stars begin to wink into view, shy at first, then bolder. The moon rises slowly, catching silver on the grass. You hear a distant owl, a cart rattling far off, and someone coughing in the dormitory, likely due to too many pickled onions and not enough prayer. You tuck your ledger away, stand slowly, and stretch. Your knees do indeed sound like dry wood. Maybe you'll borrow one of Theda's wraps after all. As you walk past the skeps one last time, you whisper good night to each, just in case they're listening. "Sleep well, little queens. Don't let the wind in. Try not to chase the owl again." Your voice is low, soft, like the night itself. At the last skep, you pause. A single bee sits near the entrance, motionless. You watch her for a moment, then gently lift her onto your fingertip. She stays, unmoving, her tiny legs curled under her. Not dead, just resting. You carry her to a warm spot under the skep's edge and tuck her gently into the straw. "There," you say. "Nap approved." You step away, brushing wax from your sleeves, and head back toward the abbey, where the last candle still flickers in the chapel window. You know that wax. You know that flame. And you know the bees that made it. You wake to the sound of bells, again. This time it's not the village bell or the chapel summons. It's a small, high chime, irregular and very close, like someone's dropped a bundle of tiny metal spoons down the stairs. You blink, sit up, and realize it's coming from the scriptorium. The scriptorium is the abbey's writing room, warm, dry, and always suspiciously silent, like it's hiding secrets in the margins. You've been summoned here by Brother Ulrich, the scribe in charge of all things written, sealed, copied, and, when the mood strikes, illustrated with very tiny dragons. "Bring wax," the note said, "and patience." You shuffle in, carrying a pot of clean wax and your notebook, still smudged from yesterday's salve making. The room is filled with the scent of ink, old parchment, and Brother Ulrich's perpetual despair that no one else respects the art of punctuation. "Ah, the apiarist," he mutters, not looking up. "Come in. Sit. Don't touch the vellum." You sit. You do not touch the vellum. On the long table before him are rows of parchment, each one bearing elaborate, curling text. At the end of each letter, there's a red ribbon waiting to be sealed. Confirmations, Ulrich explains. Land grants, vows, one broken betrothal, very dramatic. I need seals. Your wax. You set the pot gently on the table and pull out the flat iron spoon you keep from melting. Different from your hive spoon, though, to be honest, they've occasionally swapped roles. You light the small oil lamp on the corner of the table, tilt the spoon, and begin melting the wax. The wax begins to bubble slowly, turning from a firm golden brick into liquid amber. You stir it with a stick, small, smooth, and charred on one end from overuse. Brother Ulrich selects a brass seal from his tray and positions it above the first parchment ribbon. 3-second press. Firm, not forceful, he says, as if you haven't done this before. You let a drop of wax fall onto the ribbon, then press the seal into it with calm precision. It hisses slightly, then cools. You lift the seal. A perfect impression. The abbey's sigil, a stylized bee inside a candle flame. Your idea, naturally, though no one officially gives you credit. The process continues. Drop, press, cool. Drop, press, cool. A rhythm develops, like bees building comb, repeatable, soothing, deliberate. Each document sealed carries a weight. Ownership, promises, blessings. The occasional passive-aggressive complaint from a landowner about goats eating his hedge. Historians still argue about the use of wax seals in this era, whether they were truly secure or ceremonial. Some seals were pressed by rings, others with elaborate stamps passed down from abbot to abbot. But what matters most, you've learned, is the symbolism. Wax turns a sheet of parchment into something sacred, binding, even magical, if you believe in that sort of thing. You do. A little. Between documents, Brother Ulrich speaks, slowly, carefully, like someone who doesn't often use his voice and isn't sure he wants to. Your bees do good work, he says. You nod. This wax, he runs his fingers along one of the cooled seals. It holds the impression better than anything we've used in years. You consider replying with something modest. Instead, you say, they're professionals. He smirks faintly and places another ribbon before you. As the stack of sealed letters grows, so does the warmth in the room. The oil lamp flickers. The wax smells sweet. You find yourself drifting slightly, not asleep, but swaying gently in a rhythm between fire and parchment, between heat and light. You wonder about the messages you're sealing. A letter to a noble, a decree about land, a warning to a farmer who's let his fence fall apart and now has pigs with wanderlust. So many lives tied together with threads of ink and wax. And here you are, turning honey into history. You finish the last seal, wipe the spoon clean with a scrap of cloth, and lean back. Brother Ulrich blows gently on the final seal, then nods. Excellent. That'll do. You gather your things and prepare to leave. But before you can slip out, he reaches under the desk and pulls out a small roll of parchment. This was for you. You take it, surprised. The seal is old, not from today's batch, and the ribbon is plain. You unroll it slowly and find a single line, in Ulrich's tidy script. To those who listen to small things, the world will whisper back. You glance up. He's already bent over a fresh sheet of parchment, muttering about margins. You leave the scriptorium quietly, stepping into the late morning sun. Back at the hives, you sit in the grass and watch the bees fly. You run a thumb over the wax smudge on your sleeve and think about all the things it has touched. Letters, candles, combs, skin. You write a note in your ledger. Wax seals completed. Bee sigil holding strong. Room smelled like meaning. You pause, then add. Listening well today. The meadow hums. You hum back. The abbey courtyard smells like soup and superstition today. Someone's boiled too much cabbage again, and the scent hangs in the air like a thick wool curtain. But beyond that, beneath the stew smoke and candle wax, there's something else. The gentle buzz of old stories making the rounds. You follow the sound toward the herb patch, where a small group of novices sits cross-legged in the grass. In their midst stands Brother Martin, staff in hand, beard slightly askew, expression solemn. Gather round, children, he says, though none of them are particularly young. For today I shall recount the tale of Saint Gabnate and her righteous bees. You pause behind a row of lavender, unseen, but clearly not alone in your eavesdropping. Martin raises his arms, his voice growing grand. Long ago, in the green hills of Ireland, there lived a woman named Gabnate, devout, determined, and distinctly uninterested in marriage. One day, the Lord, tired of her wandering, sent an angel to tell her to stop. One novice raises a hand. How did she know it was an angel? Because he sparkled, Martin says, moving briskly along. Anyway, the angel told her to settle where she found 9 white deer. So, like any obedient future saint, she wandered across the country for days, possibly years, possibly in circles. You suppress a snort. She finally found the deer, very polite creatures, and built her convent there. And that, children, is where the bees come in. You lean a little closer. A group of bandits tried to steal cattle from her village, he says, voice dropping to a whisper. But Gabnate called upon her hives. She prayed, she gestured dramatically, and the bees swarmed like holy arrows. He spreads his arms wide. They chased the bandits, stung them without mercy, drove them straight out of the valley. Did the bees get medals? One novice asks. They got more flowers. Martin replies. Which is better, really? He finished the tale with a flourish, then turns slowly and, yes, of course, spots you. You know this one, he says, waving you over. You're our beekeeper. Tell them what bees do when they're praised. You blink. They hum in a higher key. Martin beams. Exactly. You sit beside him, cross-legged in the grass, and one of the novices hands you a warm stone to lean against. It smells faintly of thyme and enthusiasm. You ever blessed a hive? Martin asks. You think for a moment. No, but I once apologized to one for knocking it with a broom. They seem to accept my regret. He nods seriously. That counts. There's a long pause as the group falls into a gentle, post-story lull. You run your fingers through the grass, feeling the stems slip between your knuckles, the scent of mint rising faintly with every movement. One of the novices pipes up. Are there other bee saints? Oh yes, you say, though most just like honey. You recount what you've heard of St. Ambrose, whose mouth, as a baby, was filled with bees. Some say it was a sign of future eloquence. You suspect it was more of a health hazard. Bees were seen as messengers, you continue, bridging the natural and divine, making sweetness out of labor. Martin nods. Little monks with wings. You smile. And stingers. Some monks have those too, he adds dryly. You stay there for a while, trading bee lore, listening to the novices share what they've heard from grandparents and neighbors. Stories about bees whispering secrets, leading lost children home, or refusing to work for cruel masters. Historians still argue how much of this folklore was belief and how much was bedtime embellishment. But for those who lived with bees, who watched them dance and hum and vanish and return, it's hard not to feel there's something more in their presence. Eventually, the group disperses, drawn away by the scent of bread or the threat of chores. Martin lingers, hands folded behind his back. You think bees remember us, he asks. You consider the question. Maybe not names, but gestures, moods, sounds. He nods slowly, like monks. Then, you walk him back toward the chapel, where the candles glow soft and golden in the deepening light. A few are flickering lower than they should be. Time for trimming. You volunteer to help, because the wax is yours. The flames, in a way, are yours too. Inside the chapel, the quiet is immediate and whole. The air is warm, edged with incense. You trim wicks with a tiny knife, catching the curls in a folded scrap of parchment. Each candle hums with purpose, soft light pooling beneath it like honey in a dish. You run a hand over the base of one, feel the slight imperfections in the wax. A lump here, a ridge there, signs of handcraft, of hive work. You make a note in your ledger. Saint Gabnate honored today. Martin tells it well. Candles flickering stronger. You draw a bee with a halo and tiny sandals. As the sun slips beyond the walls and the chapel darkens, you light one last candle, just for the bees. Then you sit a while, in that golden hush, and let the warmth seep into your skin. The next morning, you're barely 2 bites into a lukewarm oat cake when you hear raised voices coming from the refectory. Not the angry kind. More the important person is arriving and we've forgotten how to act kind. You peek around the corner and spot Abbot Hugh mid-gesture, flanked by 2 of the kitchen brothers, both holding combs. Not honeycomb, actual hair combs. They seem to be having a theological debate about whether the guest deserves the ceremonial napkin. You back away slowly. Not your fight. As you turn, Sister Willa nearly barrels into you carrying a tray of covered dishes. Move, she snaps. Bishop's coming. He likes the fancy wax. Ah, that's what this is about. The bishop, tall hat and all, is due for his annual visit. Technically, he's here to inspect the grounds and ensure the monks haven't wandered into heresy. In practice, he expects soft bread, long prayers, and beeswax candles that don't sputter. You, of course, are responsible for that last part. You make your way to the candle room where neat rows of your finest handiwork stand ready. Tall, smooth, fragrant with just the faintest trace of clover. These are the Abbey's showpieces, the result of weeks of patient work, careful rendering, and the occasional whispered threat to a lazy mold. You pack the best dozen into a padded crate and carry it toward the chapel, where Abbot Hugh is already positioning himself like a man auditioning for sainthood. He spots you and nods. Briskly, the bishop likes clean flames, he says. No spitting. You resist the urge to say that's more of a spiritual concern than a candle one. The bishop arrives not long after, robed, perfumed, and surrounded by a small entourage of assistants, one of whom is clearly just here to nod approvingly at everything he says. The man looks like he was born with a quill in his hand and no tolerance for bees. Introductions are made. Compliments are exchanged. The candles are lit with ceremony. They burn steadily. No smoke. No sputter. You allow yourself a tiny smile. The bishop notices. These are quite fine, he says, peering at the flames. From local wax. You nod. Our bees. Our skeps. Every drop rendered here. He seems genuinely impressed. And the scent. Wildflower. Mostly clover. Some thyme. Possibly a bit of elder. He leans in, sniffing thoughtfully, then nods. Very agreeable. Reminds me of a chapel in Avignon. You have no idea where that is, but smile politely. He moves on, already distracted by an especially long scroll someone has placed in his path, detailing the Abbey's expenditures and, perhaps, someone's attempt to claim an entire pig as a religious expense. You slip out the side door before anyone thinks to assign you cleanup duty. Outside, you make your way to the workshop to check the wax stores. You pass Brother Niles along the way, who's muttering about last year's bishop being less enthusiastic and something about an incident with a candle that caught the hymn book. You decide not to ask. At the workshop, you find 2 novices stirring a fresh batch of wax. The large cauldron bubbles gently over a low flame, the air thick with the warm, resinous scent of melting comb. You show them how to skim the impurities, bits of husk, the occasional bee leg, a scrap of straw, and how to pour slowly to avoid bubbles. As you work, you remember a conversation you once had with Beata, back when your hands were still clumsy and your molds kept cracking. She said, "Every candle carries the memory of the hive. You don't just melt wax, you translate it. You didn't understand then. You do now. Each candle lit in the chapel, each seal pressed on a scroll, each drop of wax in a healing balm, those are the echoes of summer fields, of lavender wind and patient work, of bees circling skeps and dancing stories into the air." Historians still argue whether medieval candle making was truly this deliberate. Some claim the work was rushed, the wax mixed with animal fat or chalk to stretch it. Others insist the Abbey wax was pure, reserved for the sacred and the significant. You know what your wax is made of, and you know who made it. You finish helping the novices and set the new molds aside to cool. The wax settles slowly, catching the light like gold just beginning to dream. Back outside, the bishop's carriage is preparing to depart. You watch from the edge of the courtyard as he climbs in, nods once more to Abbot Hugh, and vanishes in a clatter of wheels and self-importance. Abbot Hugh turns to you. He liked the candles. You incline your head. They liked him. He looks confused, then nods thoughtfully, like you've said something profound. You return to the hives just in time for the evening hush. The meadow is bathed in warm shadow, the bees slow and heavy with the day's work. You walk past each skep, murmuring a quick thanks. You sit beneath the crooked apple tree and jot in your ledger. Bishop approved. Candles steady. Hive wax praised. Beata would have grinned. You sketch a small candle with wings. The stars begin to blink overhead, one by one, and the first night breezes rustle the tall grass. The wax has cooled. The bees are resting. And for tonight, the world is quiet. The thing about small villages is that everyone knows when something sticky goes missing, especially if it was meant for the abbot's toast. You're kneeling beside the herb bed, trying to coax a reluctant clump of lavender back to life, when a novice runs up, panting, cheeks red, hair fluffed like he's been chased by wild goats. It's gone, he gasps. The honey. You blink up at him. Which honey? He waves his arms wildly. The honey. The good jar. The one with the wax seal and the nice lid. You sigh. Of course it's that honey. The one you'd set aside in a carved clay pot, sealed it with your finest stamp, and marked for ceremonial use. Or, at least, for Sunday. It was a particularly rich harvest, deep amber in color, thick, floral, with notes of apple blossom and smugness. You straighten your back, dust off your knees, and follow the novice toward the pantry, which is now in disarray. There's a clean patch on the shelf where the jar used to be, and a faint trail of sticky fingerprints leading toward the west corridor. You resist the urge to ask why anyone would try to steal honey from a monastery. Then again, you've seen people do stranger things for lesser rewards. Last month, Brother Fennel tried to ferment turnip water into mead. It did not end well. The bees wouldn't go near him for 3 days. You follow the trail down the corridor, through the cloister, and out to the orchard, where a small, barefoot figure is crouched behind a barrel. Odo, you say, as gently as you can. The potter's boy peeks up, face smeared with gold, both hands plunged into the honey jar like it's a wishing well. Hello, he says faintly. You approach, arms folded. Explain. He blinks. I wanted to see what bees taste. You squat beside him, careful not to step in the trail of honey now attracting a determined line of ants. You could have asked. I was going to, he says. But the lid was so nice, and I thought maybe I'd just have a spoonful. You glance at his hands. You used your spoon. No, my hands. You pinch the bridge of your nose. You retrieve the jar, now half empty and definitely compromised. You sigh, offer Odo a damp cloth from your pouch, and try to explain the sanctity of shared honey. He listens with wide, sticky eyes. When you return to the abbey, the incident is already spreading. Did you hear? One monk whispers. A child tried to bathe in the bishop's honey. The bees sensed it, says another. They'll come for him tonight. You shake your head and retreat to your hives, where the only gossip is the gentle murmur of wings and the occasional bee bumping your shoulder like it's reminding you to refill the water trough. You inspect each skep carefully, eyes attuned to the smallest signs. Excess moisture, torn thatch, a slant in the comb. Everything seems well. You linger by the youngest hive, the one from the rescued swarm. It's thriving. The hum is stronger now, more complex. You smile. Back at your bench, you scrape clean a few spare combs, letting the wax fall into a waiting dish. You'll melt it down later. Maybe mold a new candle, or seal another jar, a smaller one, with a less inviting lid. As you work, you remember an old story Beata once told you. Not a legend, just a bit of local lore. Once, a man tried to steal honey from an abbey. He crept into the apiary at night, reached into a skep, and was never seen again. Some say the bees carried him away. Others say he tripped and fell into the pond and decided, quite reasonably, to become a fisherman instead. Historians still debate how monasteries protected their honey stores. Some used locked rooms, others trained dogs. A few kept the skeps near the chapel, trusting that bees, when kept close to God, would act as their own guards. You prefer your current method, frequent visits, whispered greetings, and the quiet understanding between keeper and hive. You pull out your ledger and write. Ceremonial honey missing. Recovered, partially. Child sticky. Skeps undisturbed. You draw a tiny jar with hands sticking out of it. Later, after the mess has been cleaned and Odo has been gently sentenced to a week of herb sorting, you carry what's left of the honey to the kitchen. Sister Willa raises an eyebrow. This the one he marinated in. You nod. She sniffs it, shrugs, and hands it to Brother Fennel. We'll call it infused, she says. Serve it with cheese. No one will know. You almost laugh, but your eyes are drawn instead to the window, where the meadow glows gold in the low sun, and the hives glint like quiet, waiting lanterns. You walk out to them one last time before evening prayers. You press your hand to the side of the young skep. The hum inside is soft, confident, like bees who know what they're about. And tonight, that's enough. The weather has turned. The wind that used to kiss your cheeks now pulls at your cloak with cold fingers. Leaves rattle across the abbey yard, and a low gray sky settles over the meadow like a heavy wool blanket no one asked for. The bees, sensing the shift long before you did, have slowed down. Their flights are shorter now, their hums more deliberate. You stand at the edge of the apiary, one hand resting on a half-filled sack of burlap, the other clutching a loop of wool twine. It's hive blanketing season. This is the quiet part of beekeeping. No harvesting, no smoke, no chasing swarms into baskets or children out of comb. Just preparing, methodically, patiently, for the long cold ahead. You kneel beside the first skep, unroll the burlap, and begin the careful wrapping process. Once around the dome, overlapping edges, tied snug but not strangling. It's like tucking in a very delicate, very humming loaf of bread. You whisper as you go, not instructions, just a kind of sleepy encouragement. You've always done this, even before you noticed. Bees don't understand words, but maybe they catch tone, and it's hard not to talk to something you've watched grow all summer. As you wrap each hive, you check the entrances, small round holes just above the base. You clear them with a twig. Make sure no straw has slumped or blocked the way. Airflow matters, even in winter. Too much chill, and the bees shiver themselves into silence. Too little, and moisture builds up. Cold they can survive, damp they cannot. You pause at the third hive and pull away a strip of moss that's grown across the bottom edge. Beneath it, a beetle scurries out, offended. You flick it into the grass and press the moss into a ball. One less guest for the bees to worry about. Historians still argue whether medieval beekeepers fully understood hive insulation. There are references to wrapping, yes, but also to warming spales and prayer circles. Some abbeys even appointed a winter watcher, a monk whose job was to guard the hives against frost and misfortune. You applied once. Willa said it sounded too much like sitting in the cold and being dramatic, which, to be fair, is not entirely inaccurate. You finish tying off the fourth hive and straighten slowly, your back crackling like frost on stone. The meadow is mostly quiet now. A few birds squabble near the berry bushes, and the abbey dog barks once, then seems to regret the effort. You take a slow walk around the hives, checking the wraps, adjusting edges, occasionally muttering, "There we go," or, "Too tight, sorry." It's like dressing a group of very round, very sleepy children for bed. At the youngest skep, the one from the summer swarm, you pause longer. It's smaller, still gaining strength, still unsure. You wrap it in 2 layers and push extra wool around the base. The hum inside is soft, like a breath held in sleep. You press your palm to the side. "I'll be back soon." You always say it. You return to your workbench to sort your supplies. Half-used balls of twine, frayed burlap scraps, a handful of bees' wax pieces too small to mold. You place them in your kit, tidy and ready for spring. Next comes the syrup, not the honey kind. This is simpler. Sugar and water, boiled down, cooled, and poured into shallow wooden dishes placed near the hives. It's emergency rations for the days when stores run low. You ladle the syrup carefully, stepping between the skeps, watching the first few bees emerge gradually to investigate. One lands beside your thumb, pauses, then dips its tongue into the mixture like someone sipping soup in polite confusion. You grin. Inside the abbey, You can hear the muffled sound of chanting. Evening prayers are starting. You know the rhythm by heart. A hymn, a reading, silence. Tonight, the reading will be about preparation, probably, fortifying the soul for winter, making peace with dormancy. You wonder if anyone will think of the bees. You certainly are. You light a small candle from your belt pouch and place it in a nook near the youngest hive. Not for warmth, it won't last long enough for that. Just as a signal, a flicker of light in the gray, a reminder. You sit on the overturned bucket and pull out your ledger. Blanketing done, young hive double wrapped, beetle ejected, syrup offered. You add, wine smells of stone, bees settling, all things winding down. You sketch a bee wearing a very large scarf. As the sky darkens and the last flights of the day return to the hives, you take one more loop around the meadow, brushing your fingers along the sides of the wrapped skeps. You don't count aloud, but you mark each one silently. 7 hives, 7 tiny kingdoms, tucked in and waiting. You return to the abbey, shaking dew from your cloak, boots thudding softly on the worn path. The chapel windows are glowing now. You pause to look. You recognize the light. You made it. The bees made it. You press your hand to the chapel wall, the stone cool and unbothered. Then you turn and head toward the kitchen, where someone's probably made stew and forgotten the salt. You'll add a drop of honey, just a little, a final nod to the day. The first frost will come soon. But tonight, everything is wrapped, everything is humming, and everything is exactly where it should be. The snow comes earlier than expected. You wake to a world gone silent, the kind of quiet that hushes even the birds. The windows frosted over, and your breath clouds the air as you pull on your cloak. Your boots are still damp from yesterday's chores, and you curse gently under your breath, just enough to feel better, not enough to risk divine wrath. Out in the meadow, the grass has vanished under a thin, sparkling crust. It's not a heavy snow, more a dusting, like someone's tipped over a sugar jar on the world. But it's enough to change everything. You make your way to the hives carefully, footfalls muffled, the familiar path transformed. The bees won't be flying today. They'll be deep inside their skeps, clustered together for warmth, vibrating their tiny bodies to generate heat. 1,000 little heartbeats, beating as one. At the edge of the apiary, you spot something odd. Footprints, small, bare, and definitely not yours. You crouch to inspect. They circle one of the hives, then vanish toward the orchard. You narrow your eyes. Mischief is afoot, and the footprints, sticky. You follow them through the snow to the edge of the apple trees, where a small figure is crouched behind a pile of kindling. Again, Odo, you say, not unkindly. He peeks up. His face is red from cold, his hands tucked under his arms. You're barefoot, you point out. They were drying, he says. You stole honey again. He looks guilty. Just a little comb. They're asleep. Right. You sigh and sit beside him, the cold seeping into your bones instantly. Odo, you've been told. The bees need every drop now. I didn't mean harm, he says. I just miss the taste. And no one else talks about them like you do. You glance over at the distant hives, mounds of burlap now flecked with snow, like sleeping giants tucked beneath blankets of wool and frost. They're still here, you say softly. Still working, just inside. He's quiet for a moment. Then, I had a dream they flew through my window. One held a candle. The others were dancing. You stifle a smile. Well, at least they were organized. You help him to his feet, guide him back to the abbey, and tuck him into a chair near the hearth. Someone hands you a blanket and a steaming bowl of oat porridge, which you pass to him without ceremony. You return to the meadow, boots crunching fresh snow, and begin your inspection. The hive wraps are holding, the entrance holes clear. You brush snow from the tops, gently, like dust from a favorite book. Your breath comes in clouds. The bees are silent. But silence isn't absence. Not here. You press your ear to the side of a skep and listen. There it is. A low, steady thrum. Alive. You check each hive the same way, one by one, each with its own note. Some deeper, some brighter, like music played on comb and warmth. When you reach the youngest hive, your hand hesitates, then rests, The sound inside is fainter, but present, still holding, still hope. You walk back to your bench and begin preparing your next line of defense, the scarecrow. Technically, it's not a scarecrow at all, more a scarechild. You've built it from old tunics, a pair of ruined boots, and one of Beeta's discarded hats, a floppy, wide-brimmed thing that makes the whole thing look like a beekeeper who's had one too many spoonfuls of mead. You set it near the apiary entrance, facing the path. It leans slightly to the left, which you decide gives it character. Historians still argue about hive protection methods. Some abbeys used netting, others built wooden shelters or planted thorn hedges, but many relied on simple human-shaped figures to ward off intruders, animal or otherwise. You don't know if it'll keep Odo away, but it might give him pause, especially if you add a beard. As you adjust the hat, a gust of wind kicks up the snow and sends a flurry of flakes dancing across the meadow. You shield your eyes, then laugh softly as one particularly bold bee, likely confused and early, emerges, hovers, and dives straight back into the hive. Changed your mind, eh? You murmur. You make your way to the chapel for warmth, ducking inside just as the choir begins the evening chant. The candles glow steady. The scent of beeswax rich and clean. You recognize each flame. You know where the wax came from. You remember the hives, the harvest, the careful pouring. It feels like a kind of immortality, a small one, quiet, but real. You pull out your ledger and write. Slowly, fingers still red from the cold. First snow, hives quiet but humming, young ones stable, Odo barefoot again. You draw the scarecrow, complete with hat and boots, arms raised like he's about to deliver a sermon. As the hymn ends and the brothers file out, you stay a while longer, watching the candles flicker, listening to the hush. You think of the bees, deep in their straw domes, wings still, hearts warm. You'll visit again tomorrow, and the day after that, all through winter, until the snow melts and the meadows bloom and the air hums again with motion. But for now, this is enough. Warm wax, steady flame, silence that is not empty, but full, and maybe a very confused boy who dreams of dancing bees. You've been invited to a wedding. Well, invited might be generous. It's more that Brother Ulrich thrust a folded piece of parchment into your hand during breakfast and muttered something about needing extra candles and maybe a speech. You unfold the note carefully, which is mostly smeared with stew and enthusiasm. It reads, Gertrude and Willem, joining of hands and bees, today at sundown. Candles required, possibly mead. You squint. Joining of hands and bees. Sister Willa, who overhears everything whether she wants to or not, leans in. They're putting a hive in the dowry. Ah, weddings in the village are always a mix of sacred vows, loud singing, and curious livestock. But this one feels especially tied to your world. Gertrude is the baker's daughter, known for her honey cakes and highly specific opinions on jam. Willem's a shepherd who once tried to barter wool for beeswax and ended up with a swarm in his lunch sack. They're calling it a union of sweetness and stubbornness. You think that's fair. You head to the candle room to prepare. The bride requested ones that smell like something happy. So, you choose a batch poured with elderflower and a hint of clover. They burn with a soft, warm scent, light, floral, and just a bit like a summer afternoon pretending it's still June. You pack 6 into a basket with sprigs of rosemary and a beeswax stamp ribbon. Then you stop by the apiary. You promise the couple a wedding gift, a small skep, preceded with fresh comb and lined with moss and thyme. You lift it gently onto a sled, the ground still too wet for carts, and begin the slow, creaky journey down the path toward the village square. When you arrive, the celebration is already blooming into full noise. Someone's playing a fiddle. Children are tying herbs to everything that holds still. A goat is chewing on a decorative garland and appears deeply committed. Gertrude spots you and claps her flower-dusted hands. You brought them, of course, you say, lifting the skep with theatrical care and placing it on a small wooden stand beside the feast table. They've agreed to attend quietly. Willem nods solemnly. I've got extra nettle branches in case of unrest. Charming, Gertrude says, elbowing him affectionately. The ceremony itself is brief: 2 vows, 1 blessing, and a moment of silence. A single bee, right on cue, flies between them and lands on the edge of a honey jar. Everyone gasps as if it were scripted. You consider asking it to join your lectures. Then come the songs, old ones, half-forgotten ones that involve rhymes about bees getting married in bell towers. You light the candles one by one, their glow weaving through the twilight like the hum of a hive finding its harmony. Someone uncorks a jug of mead and hands you a cup. It's sweet and slightly dangerous. You sit on a hay bale and watch the festivities unfold. Children run in circles, arms out like bees. The fiddler's foot stomps time. Gertrude spins in her wedding tunic, which is decorated, of course, with embroidered bees along the hem. Willem keeps swatting crumbs off his tunic and checking on the hive like it might make a toast at any moment. You laugh quietly and sip your mead. Historians still argue about the role of bees in medieval marriage ceremonies. Some say hives were traditional dowries, practical, valuable, and seen as symbols of fertility and industry. Others suggest they were wedding gifts from abbeys, especially when the couple had ties to monastic lands. And of course, there's always the folklore: if bees land on a bride, it's a blessing. If they fly away during vows, it means someone forgot the salt. You lean back and let the music drift over you. For once, no one is asking you to fix anything. No hives to patch, no salves to stir, just warmth and light, and the murmur of bees settling in their new home. You pull out your ledger and write in the faint candle light: Gertrude and Willem wed, hive gifted, bee attended, mead strong, candles well received. You add, evening full of wings and wishes. You sketch a bride, a shepherd, and a very smug bee in the middle. As the moon rises and the songs slow to humming, you help gather the candles, tucking the softened wax back into your pouch. The hive remains calm, nestled in its stand, bees tucked tight in their new place, unaware of their ceremonial status. You say your goodbyes, receive a honey cake for the road, and walk back toward the abbey beneath a sky scattered with stars and laughter that lingers in the air like the scent of rosemary and sugar. The meadow is quiet when you pass it, the skeps resting in their wraps, unaware they've just gained a sibling. You pause by your favorite hive, press your hand gently to the side. Someone got married. You whisper, no swarm yet. You smile in the dark and head inside, the warmth of the evening still clinging to your sleeves. Morning brings fog, the kind that swallows the trees whole and hangs low enough that the tops of the hives vanish in a blanket of soft gray. You stand at the edge of the apiary, mug of hot broth in hand, watching the mist curl through the meadow like it's trying to remember something. Fog always makes things slower. The bees stay inside. The chickens refuse to leave the co-op. The monks walk around squinting, as if vision alone might part the haze. You like it, though. It makes the world smaller, quieter, like someone's turned the volume down on everything. You settle onto your usual bucket and listen. No buzz, just the occasional creak of a tree branch and the faint slosh of your broth. You tilt your head toward the nearest skep. No movement at the entrance. That's normal. Too cold, too damp. Still, you lean in close, press your ear to the straw. A soft vibration greets you. Not frantic, not sluggish, just aware. You nod to the hive like you've confirmed a secret. Then, from the mist, a figure appears, tall, robed, and carrying a bundle under one arm. It's Brother Jerome, the Abbey's unofficial archivist and official collector of interesting dust. He reaches you with the air of someone who's been rehearsing his opening line all morning. I have found something, he announces, lifting the bundle. You gesture to your mug. So have I. Mushrooms and regret. He chuckles and unwraps the cloth, revealing a book, old, bound in leather, the spine slightly chewed. I was clearing the corner shelves, he says. You know, the ones no one's dusted since the bishop's second visit. You nod. That corner smells like mildew and misplaced candles. I found this tucked between a hymn book and something about ox maintenance. You take the book carefully. It's heavier than it looks. On the cover, pressed faintly into the leather, is a faded image of what you think is a bee, or possibly a lion with a particularly abstract mane. Inside, The script is uneven but legible. Notes, sketches, pressed herbs, bits of waxy residue between the pages. You recognize the handwriting. Beata. Of course, it's her old field journal, the one she claimed had wandered off after a particularly dramatic storm 3 years ago. You always suspected it had simply buried itself somewhere out of protest. You flipped through the pages slowly, breath fogging as you read. Notes on swarm patterns, recipes for herbal blends meant to calm nervous hives, a sketch of a particularly fat bee labeled Gregory. There are fragments of poems, snippets of overheard gossip, a half-finished limerick about a bee who refused to land on monks. Historians might call it chaotic. You call it familiar. Jerome watches you read, then clears his throat. I thought it might be useful, or at least comforting. It's both, you say, carefully smoothing one crinkled page with your sleeve. You spend the morning transcribing the legible parts into your own ledger, occasionally copying Beta's small illustrations, a bee in a hood, a skep with a smile, a candle dancing on one foot. You add your own notes beside hers, replies, really? As if continuing the conversation. Under one diagram labeled Bee Dance, Figure 8, you write, still uncertain, possibly just showing off. You pause on a page with a wax stain in the corner and a title in larger script. Things bees might believe. The sun is made of clover. Humans are large, slow-moving flowers. Winter is just a long nap interrupted by snow. All candles are sacred. The loud monk cannot be trusted. You smile and add, they're probably right about the monk. The fog never lifts entirely. Instead, it fades gently toward noon, like someone drawing back a curtain one finger at a time. By the time you walk the meadow again, the hives are beginning to stir. A single bee emerges from the youngest skep, hovers in the still chilly air, then returns inside like someone stepping out to check the weather and immediately deciding against it. You tuck Beta's journal into your satchel, alongside your own. Together, they feel heavier, but in a comforting way, like two hands held behind your back. You sit beside the hives again, this time with a bit of honeyed oat cake and a cup of warm tea steeped with dried mint. You offer a crumb to a bee that flies too close. She ignores it. Bees are surprisingly picky. You write in your ledger, fog, Beta's book returned. Bees still believe in sunlight. So do I. You draw the round bee she named Gregory, this time wearing a crown. As the wind picks up and the sky begins its slow drift into afternoon, you hum a little, one of the tunes from her notes. It has no words, just a rhythm that matches the beat of wings and the shuffle of straw. And in the quiet of the misty meadow, you feel her still. In the pages, in the wax, in the hum, you're jolted from a mid-afternoon doze by the unmistakable sound of wheels and ducks. Not just any wheels, cart wheels. And not just any ducks, the loud, determined kind that travel in packs and harbor opinions. You peek over the edge of your bench, oat cake crumbs still on your tunic, and spot the beau lumbering down the path with his usual look of mild chaos and questionable optimism. Morning, he calls, despite it being very much the wrong time of day. Got room for a few barrels. You arch a brow. Barrels of what? Of honey, he says with the exact sort of pride someone might use to announce they've personally invented sweetness. He hops off the cart and pulls back the cloth cover to reveal 6 wooden barrels, each stamped with the abbey's wax seal and smelling strongly of wildflower and the faintest hint of turnip. That last part concerns you. Don't ask, he says, catching your expression. The co-op had storage issues. You sigh and inspect the barrels. Surprisingly, they're intact. You pry the lid from one, carefully, and breathe in the rich scent of early summer. The honey inside is thick, golden, flecked with the occasional pollen granule, and utterly glorious. You let a finger dip into the surface and give it a taste. Perfect. Where are these going? You ask. Port Town, the beau says. For days east, if the road isn't flooded. Supposed to trade them for spices, maybe dried citrus, or bolts of silk, or, he leans in, conspiratorially, one of those paper fans that makes monks look mysterious. You smirk, spending holy coin on flair. They're useful. He gestures broadly. Also good for shooing bees. You roll your eyes and begin checking the seals. Each one must be firm, stamped cleanly, and protected from water. You re-wax the lids and fasten an extra layer of burlap around the last. The sun beats down, warming your back as you work. Historians still argue about how widespread medieval honey trade was. Some evidence points to regional exchanges, abbeys trading honey and wax for cloth, wine, or metal tools. Others suggest honey traveled great distances, changing hands again and again until it reached far-flung markets. Either way, the value was unquestioned. Honey was currency, comfort, cure. You help the beau recover the cart. He hands you a tiny scroll, tied with twine, sealed in wax. From the merchant, instructions. Also maybe a recipe for almond paste. You slip it into your pocket and walk the length of the cart, running your fingers along the sides of the barrels. There's something satisfying in the weight of them, something final. The bees' labor, condensed and sealed, ready to travel roads they'll never see. As the beau climbs aboard and adjusts the reins, he pauses. You ever think about how bees make all this, but never get to taste where it ends up? You blink. That's surprisingly poetic. He shrugs. Had some free time yesterday. Stepped in a puddle and got reflective. You nod. I'll tell the bees. They deserve it. The cart rattles off, ducks scattering like outraged dignitaries. You return to the hives and sit for a long moment, watching the shadows lengthen across the grass. The bees are quieter now, sun dipping lower, wings slowing. One last burst of flight before rest. You think of the honey's journey, packed in barrels, bumped along uneven roads, perhaps sloshing slightly when the beau inevitably veers into a ditch. You wonder who will open those barrels on the other side. A merchant, a cook, a noble with a sore throat and too much silk. You pull out your ledger and write. 6 barrels sent east. Seals secure. Taste excellent. Possible duck dispute unresolved. You add. Bee's work leaves home. Still sweet. You draw a little bee wearing travel boots, pulling a barrel behind it. Later, in the warmth of the kitchen, someone unwraps a parcel of ginger and passes you a piece to chew. It burns pleasantly. You mix it with a spoon of leftover honey and imagine how the combination might taste in tea, or cake, or quiet gratitude. You step outside once more before night falls. The meadow glows faintly, hives casting long shadows, the air heavy with the last warmth of the day. You touch the edge of the youngest skep. Your work's on the road now. You murmur, you're famous. Or you will be. Just don't let it go to your heads. A single bee buzzes lazily past your face. You take it as agreement. The stars begin to appear, slow and shy, blinking their way into the sky as the meadow slips into stillness. And somewhere, barrels roll onward. The bees, at rest, have done their part. And you, for now, have done yours. The next morning begins not with the usual clatter of pots or the low murmur of monks, but with a knock, a gentle, deliberate knock. Not at your door, but on the bench outside your window. You know the sound. Only one person knocks like that. You open the shutters and peer out into the pale gray dawn. There stands old Bertram, cloak too large, boots too small, holding a bundle of cloth like he's just delivered something sacred. I brought you an apprentice, he says, voice low, like the bees might hear. You blink. I didn't order one. He nods toward the cloth, which shifts suddenly and reveals a pair of wide, blinking eyes. It's a girl, maybe 10, maybe younger, with a mop of hair, the color of oversteeped tea, and a face set in that grim seriousness only children attempting bravery can manage. She's quiet, Bertram says. Smart. Doesn't flinch when bees land on her. You study the child. She stares back. You got a name? You ask. Cora. You like bees? She shrugs. They're better than people. You nod. Can't argue with that. Bertram gives a small, satisfied grunt and shuffles off without further explanation. He's always been a man of short deliveries and long walks. Cora stands there, still holding the cloth-like armor. You motion for her to follow and lead her into the meadow. The hives are still in their early hush, the sun barely over the tree line. You kneel beside the oldest skep and gesture for her to do the same. She does, careful, silent. Touch the side, you say. She hesitates, then places her hand flat against the straw. Her fingers twitch slightly when the hum rises beneath her skin, but she doesn't pull away. "They're asleep?" she whispers. "Sort of. They slow down, dream in vibrations, save their energy for warmer days." She nods slowly, like she understands more than she's saying. You spend the morning showing her the basics: how to check the entrance, how to listen for changes in tone, how to distinguish lazy buzzing from the more urgent "someone's poked us" buzz. She watches everything, says almost nothing. At one point, a bee lands on her wrist. She looks at it for a long time, doesn't move. "She's grooming," you say, "cleaning her legs. They get dusty, like monks." Cora nods. "She's beautiful." You smile. She is. By midday, you've walked her through the wax press, the salve shelf, and the candle molds. She listens to every word, occasionally reaching out to touch the materials like she's memorizing their texture. You hand her a piece of warm wax and a loop of twine. "First lesson," you say, "a starter candle. Just roll it, gentle, even pressure, like you're tucking someone in." She nods and begins. As she works, you think of Beata, of her hands, her laugh, the way she used to mutter to herself as she wove the skep straw. You think of your own first week, fumbling everything, constantly itchy, and the time you sat on a hive by mistake. That moment you knew you were a beekeeper, not when you harvested your first comb, but when you apologized out loud to the bees for sneezing too close. Historians still argue whether apprenticeships in trades like beekeeping were formalized in this era, or mostly informal arrangements. Some abbeys kept records, aged monks assigning duties to younger ones, slowly transferring skill through repetition. Others relied on simple observation, quiet teaching, and a generous amount of patience. You think you prefer this way. By late afternoon, Cora has rolled her first candle. It's crooked, slightly lumpy, but it burns clean and steady when you light it together, shielding it from the wind with your hands. She stares at the flame. "I made that," she says. "You did." The look on her face reminds you of your first flame, that tiny, flickering light. The first time you saw your bees' work transformed into warmth. She stands, holding the candle carefully, and follows you as you make your evening rounds. Together, you check each skep, wipe dew from the wraps, whisper quick greetings. You show her the ledger. Let her add her name to the margin of today's page. Cora first day. Candle steady. Bee on wrist. Not afraid. She draws a crooked little bee next to her name. It has very large eyes. That night, after she's been shown to the novice quarters and reluctantly handed over to Sister Willa for washing, you sit under the tree and watch the hives glow in the fading light. One day, they'll be hers. Not soon. Not yet. But the seeds have been planted, and bees, like children, grow quietly. With warmth, with care, with time. You open your ledger one last time and write. A keeper begins. She listens well. The bees noticed. You sketched a hive side by side. One tall, one small. The meadow is quiet, but not alone. Snow falls again overnight. This time it's softer. Dry flakes that drift down like ash from a slow-burning fire. You step out early, boots crunching on the thin crust of frost, and the world feels entirely hushed. No wind, no bird song, just the faint sound of your breath rising and falling, white in the morning air. Cora is already in the meadow. You spot her kneeling by the youngest hive, cloak pulled tight, mittens too big, her small figure still as a stone. She doesn't look up when you approach, which tells you two things. She's concentrating, and she's eavesdropping on bees again. "They're quieter today," she says. Cold slows them. You answer, crouching beside her. They move deeper inside the cluster. Less sound, less waste, just waiting. She turns to you. Do they know what they're waiting for? You shrug. They don't need to. They just trust it will come. The fog begins to lift a little as you make your rounds, Cora trailing behind like a shadow with very curious eyes. Together, you check the entrance holes, carefully brushing away snow, checking for any blockage. One hive has a bit of thatch pulled loose, likely from the wind or a particularly ambitious crow. Cora fixes it, unasked. Later, back in the workshop, she helps you sort wax scrap. Her hands are steady now. She rolls candles without being shown. She inspects comb like she's reading a language. She's quiet, but not shy, just focused. It reminds you of how bees move within the hive. Not a wasted motion, not a word out of place. You light one of her newest candles and set it on the workbench. It burns perfectly, better even than your first dozen. You don't tell her that. Not yet. You hand her a scrap of parchment. Wax labels, you say. Mark what's been poured and cured. Helps when things get busy. She frowns slightly. Why not just remember? You grin. Because bees forget nothing, and we forget everything. She nods solemnly. Writes with careful lead airing. Batch C. Smells like summer. At midday, the beau returns from his journey. Frost on his hat, mud on his cloak, grin stretching ear to ear. He barrels into the kitchen, tosses down a cloth bag, and declares, "We're rich in cinnamon." Sister Willa immediately commandeers the entire delivery. The monks swarm the doorway like it's the second coming in spice form. You and Cora escape with a small jar and a hard crust of bread. Outside, you sit on the stone bench and crack the crust open, spinning a little cinnamon honey across the surface. It softens just enough to chew. You let her taste it. Her eyes widen. That's, I know. You make a mental note to suggest cinnamon wax for spring candles. She leans against your arm, not quite a hug, but warmer than the air around you. Historians still argue whether apprentices were considered full members of their trades during training or only once they'd passed a final test. Some traditions required a crafted object, others an oral recitation, a blessing from a master. In some abbeys, a candle lit without flicker was enough. You think of how steady her flame was this morning. At dusk, you take her to the chapel. The candles lining the altar are hers, half the row, anyway. You let her light one. Her fingers are sure. Her match doesn't falter. The flame curls upward and catches, tall and golden, unblinking. Sister Benedict watches from the shadows and nods. No words, just a nod. Later, you open the ledger. This time, you hand her the quill. She writes slowly, carefully. Snow fell. Candles burned. Bees still asleep. Cinnamon is very powerful. You add beside it. Cora's steady now. Flame true. The hive notices. You draw to bees curled on a wax scroll. Night settles in fully, quiet and complete. The hives are resting. The child is becoming. The candles are burning clean. You close your eyes and think, not of work, or chores, or even spring, but of a room full of warm bees. In one small hand, steady with flame. The thaw begins slowly, not with drama or declarations. Just a steady drip from the chapel eaves and the soft, wet sigh of snow retreating into earth. Patches of brown grass peek through the slush. The air smells different, less like smoke and salt, more like something waking up. You stand at the edge of the meadow, mug in hand, and watch mist curl off the hives. The wraps are damp now, wool heavy with meltwater, and the ground squelches underfoot. You make a note to check for mold later. Cora joins you, bundled still, but her cheeks are pink, and she's humming. You recognize the tune. It's the one you taught her last week, the rhythm of roll the wax, seal the comb, stir the balm and bring it home. I heard one, she says suddenly, tilting her head toward the youngest skep. Heard what? A bee. You tilt your own ear to the straw. A hum, faint, barely there, but real. They're moving again. You kneel and peel back a corner of the burlap. Carefully, reverently. A few bees are emerging, groggy, tentative, their tiny feet tapping at the entrance like they're testing the world. One hovers briefly, then lands on your glove, her wings beating weakly before tucking into stillness. Cora crouches beside you. She's so small, she whispers, and still survived winter. The two of you sit there a while, watching as a few more bees appear. Not a swarm, not yet, just scouts, explorers, proof. The abbey yard is bustling by the time you return. Someone spilled barley near the steps, and the chickens are staging what appears to be a ritual dance. Brother Fennel attempting to sweep the stone path with a broom 2 sizes too short. You suspect he's been punished again. Back in the workshop, the air feels warmer. You open the shutters for the first time in weeks. Sunlight drifts across the bench, catching on the wax molds and highlighting the curls of wood shavings from your latest attempt at a travel-sized skep. Cora is already pulling out supplies. You ready? You ask. She nods. Time to clean them. Time to check what survived. Time to feed if needed. Time to bless them a little, too. She frowns, like with a prayer, or a smile, or a steady hand. Blessings come in lots of shapes. Together you gather what's needed. Small crocks of syrup, fresh straw for patching, bits of moss, a spindle of twine, and your little iron tool with a hook for lifting combs. You move skep to skep, unwinding the wraps, inspecting for damage. The oldest hive has held strong, its wax pattern still intact, and the bees within already circling. The second hive is damp at the base. You'll have to clear and reseal. Cora is ahead of you at the third, already trimming away a patch of rotted moss. She turns, holds up a chunk. Still smells like thyme. Means they stored some herb there. Good instincts. She beams. You lift the lid on the fifth hive, the one you were worried about. For a moment, nothing. Then a faint, warm rush of air, followed by a surge of bees emerging, slow and soft. They're alive. Tired, but alive. You smile wider than you expected. Historians still argue about how medieval beekeepers prepared their hives for spring. Some texts suggest detailed inspections and rituals, holy water, chanted blessings, even ceremonial sweeping of the thresholds. Others imply it was simpler: warmth, food, patience. You believe in all of it. Later, back inside, you begin a new batch of balm, wax melted with sage, lavender, and a touch of rosemary oil. It bubbles gently in the copper pot as you stir, the scent winding through the room and out the open window. Cora labels the jars without being told. She also draws a bee in a crown on one. You approve. As dusk begins to settle, you walk once more to the meadow. The hives are quiet again, settled after the stir of morning. But they are ready, and so are you. You open your ledger and write. Thaw begins. Hives stir. Fifth survived. Cora steady. Balm thick. Bees brave. You add. Spring not loud, but certain. You draw a bee wearing boots, carrying a daffodil. In the chapel, the evening candles are already lit. Cora lingers behind, placing one of her rolled candles on the altar's side shelf. A quiet offering. You nod once and whisper to the room. They're coming back. The first truly warm day arrives like a secret finally spoken aloud. No clouds, no wind, just light, pouring through the cloister, warming the abbey stones, coaxing every creature out of hiding. The meadow hums faintly, not just with bees, but with green things stretching, blooming, remembering what it feels like to be alive. You're already at the hives when the sun crests the treetops. A basket on one arm, your ledger under the other. Cora is beside you, her cloak flung off, tunic sleeves rolled up with pride, face tipped skyward like she's trying to memorize the exact shade of morning. They're flying, she says, and they are. Dozens of bees, emerging in lazy spirals from each skep, tumbling through the air like dancers waking from a dream. They weave around you both, brushing past cheeks, tapping shoulders, landing briefly on boots and sleeves before lifting away again. You smile. This is their celebration. You begin your final inspection of the season. If all goes well, today's the last of the heavy checks. You'll let them be after this. Let them build, expand, bloom. The first hive is vigorous. The entrance is abuzz with activity, pollen-laden bees landing, dancers inside reporting new flower sources, nurse bees caring for brood deep in the comb. Cora leans close. It smells like lemon. Good. That means they found the clover patch. The second hive is slightly slower, but still strong. A few bees seem to be guarding the entrance more tightly, defensive, alert. New queen, you say. They're still figuring things out. She nods, like monks after a new abbot. You grin. Exactly. The youngest skep, the one from last year's rescued swarm, is now your favorite. It's bursting, comb stretching all the way to the base, the bees spilling from the top like golden confetti. You carefully remove the lid and peer inside. The hum is deep, full, alive. Come look, you whisper. Cora stands on tiptoe beside you, her eyes wide. They're building again. You nod. Spring is for building. She watches them, her hand steady on the edge of the skep, her shadow cast beside yours in the shape of someone ready. You clean up a few stray bits of wax, leave a small dish of fresh syrup near the base of the meadow, and take one final walk past the hives, brushing your hand along each one in turn. Well done, you murmur. Back in the workshop, you begin setting away the winter tools, the wraps folded, the extra straw bundled, the bomb jars sealed and stored. The candles that remain are the last of the cold season batch, shorter, plumper, good for kitchens and corners. You hand one to Cora. Last winter candle, you say. She turns it over in her hands like a keepsake. Should we light it? You shake your head. Let's keep one. So we remember. She tucks it into a little cloth pouch and places it gently in the drawer by her cot. You spend the rest of the day mixing your spring wax blend, early lavender, thyme, and a touch of orange peel from the portrait. Cora helps pour. She doesn't spill once. In the evening, the meadow glows golden. You both return to the hives, this time us to sit. No work, no checks, just watching. The bees fly around you in quiet, contented loops. One lands on Cora's knee. She smiles and watches it clean its antennae. They trust us now, she says. They always did, you reply. We just had to earn it. She leans against your arm. You open the ledger one final time. All hives strong, young hive thriving. Cora, ready? Spring arrived. Wax sweet. Bees home. You draw to bees side by side, carrying a banner that reads, "We made it." You close the book. The bees hum their lullaby across the meadow. You close your eyes. And now, dear listener, it's time to drift. Let your breath slow, like the bees settling into their skep. The sun has slipped behind the trees. The meadow glows only faintly now, touched with the last traces of gold. One by one, the hives quiet themselves, not asleep, but still, content, complete. The straw wraps rustle just a little in the breeze, and if you lean in close, just close enough, you might still hear the faintest vibration, like a distant purr. 1,000 tiny wings, folded. 1,000 tiny hearts, beating slow. Cora is inside now. Her candle is tucked away, waiting for another frost, another season. Her hands smell faintly of beeswax and thyme, and her dreams tonight will be sweet and soft and full of wings. The abbey is quiet too. Even Brother Fennel has gone still, his broom finally set down beside the door. In the kitchen, one last ember glows in the hearth, casting the softest light across the flagstones. And out in the darkening meadow, the keeper rests beneath the crooked apple tree, head tilted, eyes closed. No words needed, no thoughts clinging, just the feeling of peace, and the knowledge that everything, is where it's meant to be. Let that peace settle over you now. You are safe, you are warm, you are home. Sleep well.